Harper Lane's water breaks at 9 months pregnant, alone in a locked penthouse with no phone, no keys, and no way out. Her husband Dante just left for Italy with his mistress, leaving her $50 like she's nothing. The security system that was supposed to protect her has become her prison. The windows won't open, the doors won't unlock. Labor pains tear through her body as she realizes the horrifying truth. He knew this would happen. He planned it, and if she doesn't find a way out in the next hour, she and her baby will die in this golden cage. If you want to see how Harper escapes the impossible, stay until the end, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The late afternoon sun cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, painting everything in shades of gold and amber that should have felt warm, but instead felt suffocating. Harper Lane sat on the edge of the California king bed, her swollen belly pressed against her thighs, counting the bills in her hand for the third time as if the number might somehow change. 5 $10 bills, $50 total. She laid them out on the silk duvet, crisp and new, probably pulled fresh from some clip in Dante's wallet. The bills looked obscene against the expensive fabric, a reminder that in this world of marble countertops and designer furniture, she'd been reduced to grocery money. "Did you check the list I left you?" Dante's voice carried from the walk-in closet, smooth and controlled as always. Even packing for a trip, he sounded like he was running a board meeting. Harper's jaw tightened. "I saw it. Make sure you stick to it. Maria restocked the basics last week, so you shouldn't need much. Just milk, bread, the essentials." He emerged carrying a leather garment bag, his dark hair perfectly styled, his charcoal suit probably worth more than most people made in a month. The money should be more than enough. More than enough. Harper wanted to laugh, but the baby chose that moment to kick hard against her ribs, stealing her breath. She pressed a hand to her belly, waiting for the discomfort to pass. Dante barely glanced at her. He was already mentally gone, she could tell, probably thinking about the business meetings in Milan, the investor dinners in Rome, a month in Italy, 4 weeks, and she was due in less than 2. "Dante?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "The baby could come early. I'm already dilated 2 centimeters. Dr. Morrison said, you'll be fine." He cut her off with the easy dismissal of someone who'd never worried about anything medical in his life. "First babies are always late. Everyone knows that. Besides, you've got the best security system money can buy. Cameras on every floor, and Marcus is always downstairs if you need anything." Marcus. The night doorman who Dante paid extra to keep logs of everyone who came and went. Harper had learned months ago that security in Dante Moretti's world meant surveillance. What if something happens? She hated the pleading note in her voice, hated that 9 months of this marriage had reduced her to begging for basic consideration. "What if I go into labor and then you call 911 like everyone else?" Dante's tone held an edge of impatience now. He checked his Patek Philippe watch, the one that cost more than a car. "Harper, I don't have time for the dramatics right now. I've got a car waiting downstairs, and my flight leaves in 2 hours." "Our flight," a woman's voice corrected from the doorway. Harper's stomach dropped. Selena Vale leaned against the doorframe like she owned it, wearing a cream silk blouse that probably cost more than Harper's entire maternity wardrobe. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, and her smile had that sharp, predatory quality that made Harper's skin crawl. "Right," Dante said, his whole demeanor shifting, warming in a way it never did for Harper anymore. "Selena's coming to handle the contracts with the Ferreira Group. She speaks fluent Italian, and her legal expertise is crucial for these negotiations." Selena's smile widened. "Someone has to make sure you don't get taken advantage of, Dante. You're too trusting." The irony of that statement would have been funny if Harper's heart wasn't hammering against her ribcage. She watched the way Selena's hand brushed Dante's arm, the way his eyes tracked her movement across the room. There was nothing professional about the way they moved around each other. "How long have you been standing there?" Harper asked, her voice flat. "Long enough." Selena picked up one of the $10 bills from the bed, examining it like it was a curious artifact. $50? That's generous, Dante. Most of the wives I know get their groceries delivered on the house account. Harper prefers to do her own shopping, Dante said smoothly, taking the bill from Selena and placing it back with the others. "Isn't that right, sweetheart?" It wasn't a question. It was a script, and Harper had learned all her lines months ago. "Right," she whispered. Dante's phone buzzed, one of three he carried at all times. He pulled it out, frowned at the screen, and started typing rapidly. "The car's here. Selena, grab your bag. We need to move." Selena disappeared back into the hallway, but not before shooting Harper a look that was equal parts pity and triumph. Harper knew what that look meant. "You're the wife, but I'm the one he actually wants with him." Dante shrugged into his suit jacket, checked his reflection in the full-length mirror, and finally looked at Harper. Really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in weeks. "You'll be fine," he said again, but this time there was something else in his voice, something that made the hair on the back of Harper's neck stand up. "The doors are on smart locks. They'll open for you from the inside, but remember the security system arms automatically at night. Don't disable it. I know how it works." "And Harper?" He moved closer, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her goodbye, might show some small gesture of affection before leaving his 9 months pregnant wife alone for a month. Instead, he lowered his voice to a near whisper. "Don't make me regret trusting you with this much freedom. You understand what I'm saying?" Her throat constricted. "Yes." "Good girl." He patted her shoulder, actually patted it, like she was a dog, and headed for the door. Harper's hand shot out, catching his wrist. "Dante, please, I'm scared. What if... Then maybe you should have thought about that before." His eyes went cold, empty. "Before you started asking questions about things that don't concern you. Before you made me look weak in front of my associates." The memory hit her like a slap. 3 weeks ago, at the charity gala, when she'd innocently asked Vincent DeLuca where his wife was, not knowing Vincent's wife had divorced him and taken half his assets in a very public, very messy split that had exposed some of his business dealings. Dante had smiled through it at the gala, but later, back in the same bedroom, he'd made it very clear that Harper's job was to look pretty and keep her mouth shut about family business. "I didn't mean, I know you didn't. You never mean anything, Harper. That's your problem." He pulled his wrist free. "Stay in the penthouse. Follow the list. Don't cause any problems. When I get back, maybe we can discuss expanding your privileges if you've learned your place." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Harper sat frozen on the bed, listening to his footsteps fade down the private hallway, listening to the elevator chime, listening to the silence that rushed in to fill the space he'd occupied. Her hands trembled as she gathered the $50 and folded the bills carefully, tucking them into the pocket of her maternity jeans. She pushed herself off the bed, an awkward maneuver now that she was carrying what felt like a small planet in her abdomen, and waddled to the window. From the 42nd floor, the city spread out below like a glittering promise of freedom she couldn't touch. She watched the black town car pull up to the entrance, watched Dante and Selena slide into the back seat, watched them disappear into evening traffic. The baby kicked again, harder this time. Harper pressed both hands to her belly, feeling the shape of a tiny foot pushing against her palm. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're okay. Just 2 more weeks, maybe 3, and then we'll figure something out. I promise." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. There was no figuring something out when you were married to Dante Moretti. There were only the rules, the lists, the $50 allowances, and the growing certainty that she'd made the worst mistake of her life. She turned away from the window and caught her reflection in the mirror across the room. When had she started looking so tired? The woman staring back at her had dark circles under her eyes, her blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing an oversized sweater that did nothing to hide how huge she'd gotten. She barely recognized herself. 9 months ago, she'd been Harper Lane, assistant manager at an art gallery, small apartment in a decent neighborhood, modest savings, and a calm, predictable life. Then Dante had walked into the gallery looking for a piece for his office, and everything had changed. He'd been charming, attentive, interested in her opinions about the art. He'd asked her to dinner. Then another dinner. Within 2 months, he'd proposed. Within 3, they were married. She'd thought it was a fairy tale. She'd been so catastrophically wrong. Her phone buzzed, or tried to. Harper pulled it from her pocket and stared at the screen. Service suspended. Payment required. Of course. The phone was on Dante's account, and he must have turned it off before he left. Just another way to make sure she stayed exactly where he wanted her. Harper's chest tightened. She looked around the penthouse, the open-concept living room with its designer furniture, The kitchen with appliances she barely knew how to use. The hallway leading to the nursery they decorated in shades of blue and gray. 6,000 square feet of luxury prison. A sharp pulling sensation low in her abdomen made her gasp. She grabbed the edge of the dresser, breathing through it. Not a contraction. She knew what those felt like from the Braxton Hicks she'd been having for weeks. This was different, sharper, more insistent. "Not yet," she told the baby. "Please, not yet. Just give me a couple more weeks, please." The sensation faded, leaving behind a dull ache. Harper straightened up, forcing herself to take slow, measured breaths. She was fine. Everything was fine. Women had babies every day. Dr. Morrison had said her vitals were good, the baby was healthy. There was no reason to panic. She made her way to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, fully stocked, just like Dante had said. Maria, the housekeeper who came twice a week, had left everything organized and labeled. But Harper's appetite had disappeared. Instead, she filled a glass with water and stood at the kitchen island staring at the list Dante had left. It was typed, printed on heavy cardstock, positioned prominently on the marble counter. Grocery list. Week of April 15th. Milk, 2%, 1 gallon. Whole wheat bread, 1 loaf. Eggs, 1 dozen. Fresh vegetables, no more than $15. Orange juice, no pulp. Chicken breast, 2 pounds, on sale only. Do not exceed $50 total. Receipt required. Receipt required. Like she was an employee, not his wife, like she might steal from him. Harper crumpled the list in her fist, then immediately smoothed it out again. Getting angry wouldn't help. Anger was what had gotten her locked down in the first place, asking too many questions, showing too much interest in where Dante went and what he did, and why there were always men in dark suits having quiet conversations in his office. She was about to throw the list away when her vision blurred. The kitchen tilted sideways. Harper grabbed the counter, her water glass slipping from her other hand and shattering on the tile floor. The pain that ripped through her abdomen wasn't like anything she'd felt before. It started low, wrapped around her entire belly, and squeezed until she couldn't breathe. She doubled over, a sound escaping her throat that was half gasp, half moan. Not Braxton Hicks. Real. This was real. "No," she panted. "No, no, no." Another contraction hit before the first had fully faded. Harper's legs buckled. She went down on her knees in the broken glass, barely feeling the sharp edges cutting into her skin through her jeans. The pain was everything, consuming, terrifying. She needed help. She needed a phone. She needed the landline. There was a landline in the master bedroom, an old-fashioned touch Dante had insisted on for reliability. Harper crawled away from the broken glass, using the kitchen island to pull herself upright. Each movement sent fresh waves of agony through her body, but she forced herself forward, one step at a time, down the hallway to the bedroom. The phone sat on Dante's nightstand, a sleek black handset that probably cost more than it should. Harper grabbed it, pressed it to her ear, and heard nothing. No dial tone. Nothing. She pressed the hook switch, tried again. Dead silence. "No." Her voice cracked. "No, please, no." She stumbled to the other nightstand, grabbed her cell phone even though she knew it wouldn't work, tried anyway. The screen lit up with the same message. Service suspended. Another contraction. Harper collapsed onto the bed, curling around her belly, making sounds she didn't recognize as coming from herself. The pain peaked, held, finally started to recede, leaving her shaking and drenched in sweat. She had to get out, had to get to a hospital, had to... The penthouse door. Harper pushed herself off the bed and half ran, half stumbled to the front entrance. She grabbed the handle and pulled. Locked. She tried the keypad next to the door, the one that was supposed to open from the inside automatically. She punched in her code. The screen flashed red. Access denied. "What?" Harper tried again, her fingers slipping on the numbers. Red again. Access denied. She tried Dante's code, the one she'd seen him use 100 times. Red, denied. The panic that had been building in her chest exploded into full terror. She pounded on the door, screaming, "Help! Someone help me! I'm locked in! The baby's coming! Help!" Her voice echoed back at her in the empty penthouse. No one answered. No one came. Harper ran to the windows, the massive, beautiful windows that showcased the city view. She tried to open the nearest one, but it didn't budge. She found the lock mechanism, tried to disengage it, but it wouldn't move. Sealed. Every single window was sealed. "This isn't happening," she whispered. "This isn't happening." But it was. It was happening. And as another contraction tore through her, Harper finally understood the truth. This wasn't protection. The cameras, the locks, the security system, none of it was about keeping danger out. It was about keeping her in. Dante knew. He knew she was dilated. He knew the baby could come early. And he'd left her here anyway, in a locked cage 6,000 feet above the city, with no phone and no way out. He'd done this on purpose. The realization should have paralyzed her, but instead it ignited something Harper hadn't felt in months. Pure, burning rage. She staggered back to the kitchen, her mind racing. There had to be a way out. There had to be something she could use, some way to... Her eyes landed on the crystal vase sitting on the dining table. It was massive, heavy, probably worth thousands of dollars. Dante had bought it at an auction, said it was investment-grade art. Harper picked it up, testing its weight. It was solid, substantial, perfect. She carried it back to the living room window, the one that faced the building across the alley. Close enough that she could see into the apartments opposite, far enough that no one could hear her screaming. She could see lights on in several units, could see the shadows of people moving around in their normal, safe lives. Another contraction started building. Harper didn't wait for it to peak. She swung the vase with everything she had. The window exploded outward in a shower of safety glass, the sound like thunder in the quiet penthouse. Cool evening air rushed in, carrying the sounds of the city. Traffic, sirens, voices, life. "Help!" Harper screamed into the night. "Someone help me! I'm in labor! I'm locked in! Please!" She grabbed a heavy picture frame from the wall, one of Dante's expensive photographs, and hurled it through another window. More glass rained down onto the street below. Someone down there screamed, "Good! Let them scream! Let them call the police! Let them do something!" "Help me!" Harper's voice was raw, desperate. "My husband locked me in! The baby's coming! Please!" She was reaching for another frame when she saw him. A man in the building across the alley, standing at his window, phone pressed to his ear. He was staring directly at her. Their eyes met across the gap. Harper didn't know if he understood, didn't know if he believed her, didn't know if he would do anything at all. But she kept screaming anyway, because what else could she do? The contraction hit full force, and Harper collapsed against the broken window frame, gasping, shaking, terrified that she was going to have this baby right here on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass and the ruins of her gilded prison. The man across the alley disappeared from his window. For a horrible moment, Harper thought he'd just walked away, decided it wasn't his problem, gone back to his normal life. But then she heard it, the sound of someone pounding on the penthouse door. "Fire department," a voice shouted. "We're coming in!" That wasn't the fire department. The voice was wrong, too rough, too urgent, too close. But Harper didn't care. She dragged herself toward the door, leaving a trail of blood from her glass-cut knees. Something heavy hit the door from the outside. Once, twice, 3 times. The lock mechanism sparked and shrieked, and then the door burst inward, slamming against the wall. The man from across the alley stood in the doorway, breathing hard, holding a crowbar he must have grabbed from somewhere. He was younger than Harper had thought from a distance, maybe 30, with dark hair and sharp eyes that took in the scene in seconds. The broken windows, the blood, Harper on the floor. "Is he still here?" the man demanded. "Your husband, is he in the apartment?" "Gone," Harper managed. "Italy. Please, the baby..." "How far apart are the contractions?" "I don't... 2 minutes? Less? I don't know." Another one was building already. She could feel it coming like a freight train. The man, whoever he was, dropped the crowbar and moved fast. He crouched next to Harper, his hand steady as he helped her into a sitting position. "I'm Jonah. I saw you from my window. We need to get you to a hospital, but you can't walk, can you?" Harper shook her head, tears streaming down her face. The contraction peaked, and she grabbed Jonah's arm, her fingernails digging into his skin as she rode it out. When it finally passed, Jonah was already making decisions. "Elevator or stairs?" "Elevator," Harper started, but Jonah was already shaking his head. Your husband controls the building security. If he locked you in here, he might have shut down your elevator access too. Stairs. I'm on the 42nd floor. Then we better move fast. Jonah hooked his arm under Harper's shoulders and hauled her upright. Come on, you're stronger than you think. Let's go. It should have been impossible. Getting down 42 flights of stairs while in active labor should have killed her, or at least made her pass out. But Jonah wouldn't let her stop. Every time Harper thought she couldn't take another step, he was there, supporting her weight, counting down the floors, telling her about completely random things to keep her mind off the pain. 28th floor, he said as they stumbled past another landing. Did you know that pigeons can recognize human faces? They did a study. Pigeons are actually pretty smart. I hate you, Harper gasped. Yeah, you can hate me in the car. 27th floor. Keep moving. By the 20th floor, Harper was leaving bloody footprints on the concrete. By the 15th, she couldn't feel her legs anymore. By the 10th, she was certain the baby was going to be born in the stairwell. But Jonah kept moving, kept talking, kept refusing to let her give up. When they finally burst through the ground floor exit into the parking garage, Harper actually sobbed with relief. Jonah half carried her to a beat-up Honda Civic that looked like it had seen better days and better decades. This is yours? Harper asked as he deposited her in the passenger seat. What, you were expecting a Ferrari? Jonah slammed the door and ran around to the driver's side. The engine coughed to life, and he peeled out of the garage like they were in a chase scene. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights he ran and contractions that came so close together Harper lost count. Jonah kept up a constant stream of commentary, partially to keep her conscious, she suspected, and partially because he seemed like the kind of person who processed stress by talking. Public ER, he said, more to himself than to her. No one asks for insurance at a public ER. They just treat you. I have insurance, Harper panted. Dante's account. Do you really want him getting a notification that you're in a hospital right now after he locked you in? The question hit like ice water. Harper stared at Jonah, the stranger who'd broken down a door to save her, and realized he understood something she'd been too afraid to fully acknowledge. Dante had tried to hurt her, maybe even tried to kill her. And if Dante found out she'd survived, he'd try again. Public ER, Harper agreed quietly. Jonah pulled up to the emergency entrance of Mercy General, a sprawling public hospital in a part of town Harper had never visited. He left the car running, probably illegally parked, and ran inside, emerging seconds later with 2 nurses and a wheelchair. Ma'am, how far along are you? One of the nurses asked as they transferred Harper from the car. 37 weeks, Harper gasped. The contractions, they won't stop. We've got you. Let's get you to L&D. Everything accelerated after that. The wheelchair became a gurney. The hallway became a delivery room. Nurses moved around her with practiced efficiency, asking questions she barely heard, taking vitals, preparing equipment. Where's her partner? Someone asked. Harper's vision swam. She looked around wildly, irrationally terrified that Dante would somehow appear, would drag her back to the penthouse, would finish what he'd started. But the face she found was Jonah's, standing in the doorway looking uncomfortable and completely out of place. Him, Harper said, reaching out. Please, don't make him leave. The nurse looked skeptical. Are you the father? No, Jonah said immediately. I don't care, Harper's voice cracked. Please, I can't do this alone. Please. Something in her voice must have convinced them, because no one argued. Jonah moved to the side of the bed, his expression unreadable. You don't have to do this, Harper whispered. You saved me. You can go. And miss the grand finale? Jonah's mouth quirked into what might have been a smile. Not a chance. The next 2 hours were the longest and shortest of Harper's life. The pain reached levels she didn't know existed. She screamed, she cried, she cursed Dante's name and every decision that had led her to this moment. Through it all, Jonah stayed, standing where she could see him, his presence steady and calm, when everything else was chaos. Almost there, the doctor said. One more push, Harper. You can do this. She couldn't. She was broken, shattered, nothing left. But she pushed anyway because what else was there to do? And then a sound, a cry, small and angry and absolutely perfect. It's a boy, someone said. A healthy baby boy. They placed him on Harper's chest, tiny and red-faced and screaming his fury at the world. Harper's hands came up automatically, cradling him, protecting him, and something inside her that had been locked away for months suddenly broke open. "Caleb," she whispered. "Your name is Caleb." She'd chosen it weeks ago, during one of the long, lonely afternoons in the penthouse. Dante had said he didn't care what she named the baby, as long as the boy carried the Moretti name. But looking at her son now, Harper knew with absolute certainty this child would never be a Moretti. He would be something better. The nurses cleaned Caleb up and handed him back wrapped in a blue blanket. Harper looked up to share the moment with Jonah, to thank him, to say something that could possibly match what he'd done for her. But Jonah was staring at the baby with an expression Harper couldn't read, something between wonder and grief so profound it made her chest ache. "Are you okay?" she asked. Jonah blinked, the mask sliding back into place. "Yeah, sorry, he's perfect. Congratulations." Before Harper could respond, a new nurse entered, older, with kind eyes and a clipboard. "All right, Mom, we need some information for the birth certificate. Let's start with your full name." Harper's mouth went dry. Information, records, documentation, all things that would ping Dante's alerts the second they entered the system. She looked at Jonah again, and he gave the tiniest shake of his head. "Harper Lane," she said clearly. Lane, my maiden name. The nurse wrote it down without comment. "And father's name?" "Not listed." Harper's voice was steady now. "It's just me and Caleb. Just me and Caleb." The words felt like a declaration of war. The nurse finished up and left them alone. The room fell quiet except for Caleb's soft breathing and the steady beep of monitors. Outside the window, the sun was starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Harper looked down at her son, then up at the stranger who'd saved both their lives. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. Jonah was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Because someone once locked me out when I needed help the most, and I swore if I ever saw it happening to someone else, I wouldn't make the same mistake they did." "What happened?" "That's a story for another time." Jonah moved toward the door. "You should rest. You're going to need your strength for what comes next." "What comes next?" Jonah paused in the doorway, looking back at her with those sharp, sad eyes. "You go home to that penthouse, Harper, and you start paying very close attention to everything your husband does, everywhere he goes, and every dollar he moves. Because men like Dante Moretti don't lock their pregnant wives in cages for no reason." "I don't understand." "You will." Jonah pulled a card from his pocket and set it on the bedside table. "When you're ready to understand, call me. But Harper, when you do call, be prepared. Because once you start seeing the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once you know the truth, there's no going back to pretending you don't." He left before she could ask what he meant. Harper stared at the card. Jonah Pierce and a phone number. Nothing else? No title, no company, no explanation. Caleb stirred in her arms, making small sounds of contentment. Harper adjusted her hold, marveling at how something so small could feel so heavy with importance. Outside, the city was waking up. Somewhere out there, Dante was probably landing in Italy, maybe already in Selena's hotel room, celebrating his freedom. He thought he'd left Harper locked away, helpless. Maybe even hoped she'd have complications that would solve his problems permanently. He had no idea she'd escaped, had no idea she'd survived, had no idea that his son had been born while he was 30,000 feet in the air with his mistress. And for now, Harper decided, she'd keep it that way. She picked up Jonah's card, studying it in the morning light. "When you're ready to understand, call me." Harper tucked the card into her bra, the one place she knew it would stay safe, and let her eyes drift closed. She had 2 weeks, maybe 3, before Dante came home. 2 weeks to heal, to think, to plan. 2 weeks to figure out how to fight a monster who held all the power. But for now, in this moment, she let herself simply hold her son and breathe. They'd made it through the night. Against impossible odds, they'd survived. And sometimes, Harper thought as sleep finally pulled her under, survival was its own kind of victory, even if the war was just beginning. The discharge nurse handed Harper a folder of paperwork and an apologetic smile. Normally, we keep moms for at least 24 hours, but with our bed shortage and since you had an uncomplicated delivery, we're clearing you for home care. You'll need to follow up with your OB within the week." Harper nodded, barely listening. She was focused on the plastic hospital bag containing the few items she'd arrived with: her ruined jeans, her blood-stained sweater, and the $50 that had somehow survived everything. Caleb slept in her arms, oblivious to the fact that his mother had no idea how she was going to feed him tomorrow. "Is someone coming to pick you up?" the nurse asked, glancing at the empty doorway. "Yes," Harper lied, "and they're just parking." The nurse left, and Harper sat alone in the recovery room, staring at the wall clock. She'd been here 18 hours. Dante's flight would have landed in Milan by now. He was probably already at whatever luxury hotel he'd booked, probably already in bed with Selena, celebrating his freedom from the burden of a pregnant wife. He didn't know. That was the only advantage Harper had. Dante had no idea his plan had failed, no idea she'd escaped, no idea Caleb existed outside the womb, and she needed to keep it that way until she figured out her next move. Harper's phone sat useless in her pocket, still suspended. She couldn't call anyone, even if she had someone to call. Her parents were dead. Her mom from cancer 3 years ago, her dad from a heart attack 6 months later. She'd been an only child. Her college friends had drifted away after the wedding, partially because Dante had made it clear he didn't like her old life intruding on their marriage, and partially because Harper had been too ashamed to admit how bad things had gotten. She was completely alone. The door opened and Harper's heart seized until she saw it was Jonah, carrying a paper bag that smelled like French fries and coffee. "You came back," Harper said, unable to hide her surprise. "Said I would." Jonah set the bag on the bedside table. "Figured you hadn't eaten. Hospital food is garbage." Harper's stomach growled at the smell, betraying her. She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon, before Dante left, before everything fell apart. "I don't have money to pay you back." "Did I ask for money?" Jonah pulled up the visitor chair and sat, his movements careful, controlled. Everything about him was controlled, Harper was starting to notice, like a man who'd learned to be very careful about showing what he was thinking. "Eat. Then we'll talk about what happens next." "I go home," Harper said, but her voice wavered. "Back to the penthouse. What else can I do?" Jonah's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "You go back to the place where your husband locked you in and left you to die in labor. That's your plan." "He didn't—" Harper stopped because even she couldn't finish that sentence convincingly. "It was probably just a malfunction. The security system, it must have—" "Don't!" Jonah's voice was sharp. "Don't do that. Don't make excuses for him. I've seen this pattern too many times and it always starts the same way, with the victim convincing themselves it was an accident. You don't know Dante. I know men like him." Jonah leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Let me guess. He controls the money. All of it. You get an allowance, maybe, but nothing in your name. He monitors where you go, who you talk to, probably tracks your location through your phone when he bothers to keep it turned on. He's isolated you from friends and family, made you dependent on him for everything, and now he's escalated to physical danger." Each word landed like a punch. Harper clutched Caleb closer, her eyes stinging. "How did you know?" she whispered. "Because it's always the same playbook. They all follow the same pattern." Jonah sat back, his jaw tight. Financial control first, isolation second, then the real damage starts. Harper wanted to argue, wanted to defend herself, wanted to insist that her situation was different somehow. But she was so tired, and Jonah's words rang with a truth she'd been avoiding for months. "What am I supposed to do?" The question came out broken. "I have no money, no job, nowhere to go. Everything I own is in that penthouse, and I can't access it without his permission. I can't even buy diapers." Jonah pulled something from his jacket pocket and held it out. A burner phone, still in the packaging. "First, you get a phone he doesn't control. This is prepaid, untraceable to you. Use it to call me and only me until we figure this out." Harper took the phone with shaking hands. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." "I know enough." Jonah stood, moving to the window. "I used to be a forensic accountant for the federal government. I built financial crime cases, money laundering, tax evasion, fraud. I tracked money for people who were very, very good at hiding it." "Used to be?" Jonah's reflection in the window went cold. "I had a partner, Sarah. We were working a case against a trafficking ring that moved money through legitimate businesses. We got close, too close. They couldn't get to me, so they went after her instead. His voice dropped to something barely audible. By the time I found her, it was too late. And the men who did it walked away clean because I couldn't prove the financial connection fast enough. Harper's throat constricted. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just understand that when I saw you screaming from that window, when I saw what your husband did to you, I saw Sarah. And I made a choice that I'd do for you what I couldn't do for her. I'd make sure you had a way out. Caleb stirred, making small, hungry sounds. Harper adjusted him automatically, her mind reeling. I still don't understand what you think I should do. Even if everything you're saying is true, even if Dante is… She couldn't say the word, couldn't make it real. I can't just leave. He'd find me. He has connections, resources, people everywhere. You don't leave. Not yet. Jonah turned to face her. You go back to that penthouse, and you act like nothing happened. You don't tell him about Caleb, not right away. You give yourself time to gather evidence. Evidence of what? Whatever he's hiding. Men like Dante don't make their money legitimately, Harper. They can't. The math doesn't work. So they create elaborate structures to hide where the money really comes from and where it really goes. Shell companies, fake loans, forged documents, offshore accounts. Jonah's eyes were intense now, focused. And somewhere in that penthouse, there's proof. Bank statements, business files, communication records. You just have to know where to look and what you're looking for. Harper's heart was pounding. You want me to spy on him? I want you to protect yourself. Because right now you're completely vulnerable. If Dante decides he's done with you, he can cut you off completely, claim you abandoned him, freeze all your assets, use his lawyers to destroy you in court. You'd lose everything, including Caleb. The thought of losing Caleb made Harper's blood run cold. She looked down at her son, so small and perfect and utterly dependent on her to keep him safe. How would I even start? She asked quietly. Jonah pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card, different from the one he'd left before. This one had a name. Miranda Cross, Special Agent, Financial Crimes Division, Federal Bureau of Investigation. When you have something concrete, you call her. Not before. She can't help you with suspicions or guesses. But if you can bring her proof of financial crimes, she can offer you protection, immunity, and most importantly, she can make sure you keep custody of your son. Harper took the card with trembling fingers. And until then? Until then, you learn to see the pattern. Jonah moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. Your husband is going to be gone for a few more weeks. Use that time. Go through his office, his computer, his files. Look for anything that doesn't make sense. Companies you've never heard of, payments that seem unusual, correspondence that feels off. Take pictures, make copies, but be smart about it. Don't get caught. I don't know if I can do this. You already did the hard part. You survived. Jonah met her eyes, and for a moment she saw past his careful control to the grief underneath. Everything else is just details. He left before Harper could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Harper sat in the silence, Caleb in her arms, the burner phone and FBI card clutched in her free hand. 24 hours ago, she'd been counting $50 and planning a grocery trip. Now she was contemplating becoming an informant against her own husband. The nurse returned with a wheelchair. Ready to head home? No, Harper thought, but she said, yes, because what else was there to say? The cab ride back to the penthouse cost $32 of her remaining money, leaving her with $18 and change. Harper watched the meter climb with a sick feeling in her stomach, knowing she'd have to make that money stretch until Dante came back, or she figured out how to access funds without alerting him. The cabbie pulled up to the building entrance, and Harper's courage almost failed her completely. The broken windows on the 42nd floor had already been boarded up. Dante's people worked fast. Marcus, the doorman, stood at his post, his expression carefully neutral as Harper climbed out with Caleb. Mrs. Moretti, Marcus said, his voice giving nothing away. Welcome home. Thank you, Marcus. Harper kept her voice steady, praying he wouldn't ask questions about the baby, about where she'd been, about anything. He simply held the door open, his eyes sliding away from Caleb like he'd been instructed not to see anything he wasn't supposed to see. The elevator ride up felt endless. Harper stared at her reflection in the polished doors, exhausted, disheveled, holding a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket. She looked like a stranger. The penthouse doors opened directly into the living room, and Harper's breath caught. Someone had cleaned up the broken glass, removed the shattered vase, put everything back in order except for the windows, which were covered in temporary plywood. It looked almost normal, like nothing had happened, but Harper would never be able to look at this space the same way again. She carried Caleb to the nursery, the room she'd decorated in hopeful shades of blue and gray, back when she'd still believed this would be a happy home. She laid him carefully in the crib Dante had assembled with unusual patience, making sure the baby monitor was on, and then she allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to stand there and cry. 5 minutes. That was all she could spare for grief and fear and rage. After that, she had work to do. Harper wiped her eyes and pulled out the burner phone Jonah had given her. She turned it on, entered Jonah's number, and typed out a text. "I'm back. Where do I start?" The response came within seconds. His office. Look for anything financial, bank statements, contracts, ledgers. Take pictures of everything. Harper crept down the hallway to Dante's home office, a room she'd been explicitly forbidden from entering without permission. The door was locked, but Harper had watched Dante open it enough times to know he kept the key on top of the doorframe. She stretched up, her stitches pulling painfully, and found it. The office was exactly as Dante had left it. Mahogany desk, leather chair, filing cabinets along one wall, and a massive computer setup that probably cost more than a car. Harper felt like an intruder in her own home. She started with the desk drawers, her hands shaking as she pulled them open one by one. Business cards, pens, notepads covered in Dante's sharp handwriting. Most of it meant nothing to her. Names of people she didn't know, phone numbers without context, abbreviations she couldn't decode. Then she found the folder. It was tucked in the bottom drawer underneath a stack of old tax returns. The tab read Meridian Holdings in Dante's handwriting. Harper pulled it out and opened it on the desk. Inside were bank statements for an account she'd never heard of. The balance made her dizzy. $7 million, moving in and out in transactions that ranged from $50,000 to $500,000 at a time. Payments to companies with names like Coastal Import Services and Platinum Consulting Group and Summit Distribution LLC. Harper pulled out the burner phone and started photographing every page, her hands steadier now that she had a task to focus on. She was so absorbed in documenting everything that she almost didn't hear the sound. A key in the penthouse door. Harper's blood turned to ice. She shoved the folder back in the drawer, killed the desk lamp, and scrambled for the office door. She just pulled it shut and was reaching for the key when she heard Selena's voice in the living room. "Told him we should have dealt with this before we left. Now we have to fly all the way back just to handle the window situation." Harper froze in the hallway, her heart hammering so hard she was sure they could hear it. "It's fine," Dante's voice responded, closer than Harper had expected. "The contractor said they can have the repairs done in 48 hours. We'll be back in Milan by Wednesday." They were here. Dante and Selena were actually here, in the penthouse, right now. Harper's mind raced. She couldn't let them see her, not looking like this, not with Caleb in the nursery, not when she was supposed to be locked in and helpless. She backed quietly toward the master bedroom, praying the floor wouldn't creak. "Did you check on your wife?" Selena asked, her tone making the word wife sound like an insult. "Why would I? She's probably sulking in the bedroom. Harper has a gift for dramatics." Their footsteps moved toward the living room, away from Harper. She used the moment to slip into the master bedroom and close the door silently. Her eyes landed on the ensuite bathroom, the only room with a lock they couldn't override from outside. Harper grabbed her phone charging cord and the bottle of water from the nightstand, then locked herself in the bathroom just as she heard Dante's footsteps approaching down the hall. "Harper?" His voice carried through the bedroom. "Harper, are you here?" She pressed her back against the bathroom door, hardly breathing. Through the crack under the door, she could see his shadow moving around the bedroom. "Huh," Dante muttered. "Maybe she actually went shopping for once." His footsteps retreated. Harper waited, counting her heartbeats, until she heard him return to the living room. "She's not here," Dante said to Selena. "Probably went to her mother's grave or something equally pathetic." "Good. Let's do what we came to do and get out of here. This place depresses me." Harper heard them moving around, heard drawers opening in the office. The office she'd just been searching. Her stomach clenched. Had she left anything out of place? Any sign that someone had been looking through Dante's files? Minutes crawled by. Harper sat on the bathroom floor, her body aching, her mind screaming at her to check on Caleb, but knowing she couldn't risk it. The baby monitor was in the nursery. If Caleb cried, they would hear him. Please, she prayed to anyone listening, please let him stay asleep. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, she heard the penthouse door open and close. Silence fell over the apartment. Harper waited another 5 minutes, then crept out of the bathroom. The bedroom was empty. She ran on silent feet to the nursery, her heart in her throat. Caleb slept peacefully in his crib, completely unaware of how close he'd come to being discovered. Harper sagged against the doorframe, shaking with relief and residual terror. That had been too close. If they'd come back an hour earlier, if Caleb had cried, if she'd still been in the office when they arrived. The burner phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Jonah. Status? Harper typed back with trembling fingers. They came back. Almost caught me. Got photos of bank statements before they arrived. Send them to me, now. Harper found the photos in her camera roll and sent them to Jonah's number. Within minutes, her phone rang. These are good, Jonah said without preamble. Meridian Holdings is a shell company. I can see at least 3 red flags just in these statements. Round number transfers, payments to known money service businesses, and a pattern consistent with layering. Layering? It's a money laundering technique. You move cash through multiple accounts and companies to obscure the original source. What you're looking at is probably step 2 or 3 in a longer chain. Papers rustled on Jonah's end. This is exactly the kind of thing Agent Cross needs. But you need more. One shell company isn't enough to build a case. More? Harper's voice cracked. I almost got caught getting this. I know, and you did great, but Dante's operation is bigger than one account. There will be others, other companies, other files, other evidence. You need to find his laptop. Harper thought of the laptop Dante always carried with him, the one he guarded like it contained state secrets. He took it to Italy. Then find his backup. Men like him always have redundancies. Look for external hard drives, cloud storage passwords, anything that might give you access to his digital files. Harper wanted to scream that she couldn't do this, that it was too dangerous, that she was terrified. But then Caleb made a soft sound in his sleep, and she remembered what Jonah had said. If Dante wanted to, he could take her son away and she'd have no legal recourse to stop him. I'll look, Harper said quietly. Good. But Harper? Don't take unnecessary risks. If he comes back again, hide. Your safety is more important than evidence. Okay. And Harper, you did well today. You're stronger than you think. He hung up before she could respond. Harper checked on Caleb one more time, then forced herself to return to the office. She had maybe 2 days before Dante came back from Milan, and she needed to make them count. Over the next 48 hours, Harper barely slept. She searched every inch of Dante's office while Caleb napped, documenting everything that looked remotely suspicious. She found contracts for properties she didn't know he owned, correspondence with people whose names made her skin crawl, and finally, hidden in a locked drawer she picked open with a hairpin and YouTube tutorial, an external hard drive. Harper plugged it into Dante's computer and found hundreds of files, spreadsheets tracking cash flows, scanned documents showing offshore accounts, emails discussing shipments and packages in language that was clearly coded. She didn't understand most of it, but she took pictures of everything, sending batches to Jonah whenever she had enough. On the 3rd day, Jonah called her. Harper, you need to stop. What? Why? Because you have enough. More than enough. What you found is evidence of a massive racketeering operation, money laundering, fraud, possibly even trafficking based on some of these communications. Jonah's voice was tense. This isn't about protecting yourself anymore. This is federal case-level evidence. You need to contact Agent Cross now, before Dante realizes what you found. Harper's hands went numb. Trafficking? Some of the payments you photographed match patterns I've seen in human trafficking operations. I can't be certain without a deeper investigation, but the structure is there. Jonah paused. Harper, if Dante's involved in something like that, you and Caleb aren't safe in that penthouse. You need to get out. And go where? I have $18 left. I can barely feed myself, let alone Caleb. The formula alone costs. I'll help you. We'll figure it out. But you can't stay there. Before Harper could respond, she heard it, the sound she'd been dreading, a key in the penthouse lock. He's here, Harper whispered. Dante's back. Hide the phone. Act normal. Call me when you can. Harper ended the call and shoved the burner phone deep in the bathroom cabinet, then grabbed Caleb from the nursery and positioned herself on the couch with him, trying to look like she'd been there all afternoon doing nothing more interesting than feeding her baby. The door opened and Dante walked in carrying a leather overnight bag, looking tanned and relaxed in a way that made Harper's blood boil. His eyes landed on her and Caleb, and for a long, horrible moment, he just stared. When did you have the baby? His voice was eerily calm. Harper's mouth went dry. 3 days ago. I tried to call you, but my phone was disconnected. 3 days ago, while I was in Italy. Dante set down his bag with careful precision. And you didn't think to find a way to tell me? To let me know my son was born? How was I supposed to tell you? You left me locked in here with no working phone, no way to contact anyone. Locked in? Dante's eyebrows rose. Harper, the door's open from the inside. You know that. They didn't. I tried. The security system malfunctioned and don't lie to me. Dante moved closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous. I checked the logs. You broke 2 windows and triggered every alarm in the building. You made a scene that had the neighbors calling the police. Do you have any idea what that looked like? What people are saying? Harper stood, clutching Caleb protectively. What it looked like? I was in labor, Dante. I was terrified and in pain and trapped. And you're worried about what the neighbors think? You were supposed to wait for me to come home. His eyes were cold, empty. You were supposed to be here, quiet and obedient, until I decided it was time to come back. Instead, you embarrassed me. The words hung in the air between them, and Harper finally saw it clearly, the thing Jonah had been trying to show her all along. This wasn't about protection or security or keeping her safe. This was about control. Complete, absolute control. And she'd just spent the last 3 days photographing the evidence that would destroy him. Dante's phone rang. He answered it without looking away from Harper, his expression hardening as he listened to whoever was on the other end. What do you mean, frozen? He snapped. Which accounts? A pause. All of them? That's impossible. There must be some mistake. Another pause. Longer this time. I'll handle it. Don't do anything until I call you back. He hung up and immediately dialed another number, then another, each conversation more tense than the last. Harper watched him pace the living room, his carefully controlled facade beginning to crack. Something was happening, something big. And based on the way Dante kept looking at her with growing suspicion, he was starting to wonder if she had something to do with it. Dante made 7 more calls in the next 20 minutes, each one more frantic than the last. Harper stayed on the couch with Caleb, making herself small and quiet, for 5 years. They don't just freeze 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 for 5 years for 5 years. They don't just freeze for no reason. He listened, his jaw working. Federal hold? What kind of federal hold? Harper's heart hammered against her ribs. Federal hold. That meant someone had already started investigating. But how? She'd only sent the evidence to Jonah 3 days ago, and he'd said she needed more before contacting Agent Cross, unless Jonah had gone ahead without her. Dante slammed his phone down on the marble counter hard enough to crack the screen. He stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, his hands braced on the counter like he was trying to hold himself upright. "Dante?" Harper ventured carefully. "What's happening?" He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her blood run cold. It was the look of a man who'd just realized he was trapped and was now calculating who to blame. "Where did you go?" he asked quietly. "When you had the baby. Which hospital?" Harper's mouth went dry. "Mercy General, the public ER." "Why there? We have premium insurance. You could have gone to St. Catherine's, Cedar Hills, anywhere with actual standards." I didn't exactly have time to be choosy. I was in labor and locked in our apartment, remember?" Dante moved closer, and Harper instinctively clutched Caleb tighter. "Who helped you?" "Someone must have helped you get to the hospital. Who was it?" "A neighbor. I don't know his name. He heard me screaming and broke down the door." "What neighbor?" "We don't have neighbors. We have an entire floor to ourselves. From the building across the alley." Harper's voice shook, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "I broke the window and screamed until someone responded. I already told you this. You broke 2 windows, threw things into the street, made enough noise that Marcus got 6 calls from other buildings asking what was happening." Dante's eyes narrowed. "That's not the behavior of someone who just needs help. That's the behavior of someone trying to make a statement. The statement was, 'I'm having a baby and I'm trapped.' What other statement would I be trying to make?" Dante's phone rang again. He ignored it, his attention fixed on Harper with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Did you talk to anyone? At the hospital after you delivered? Did anyone ask you questions about me, about our life, about my business?" "No, they asked me medical questions." "That's it. You're lying." "I'm not." "Don't." Dante's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Don't lie to me, Harper. I can always tell when you're lying. Your left eye twitches. Right there." He pointed at her face. "It's twitching right now." Harper's hand flew to her eye involuntarily. She didn't even know if that was true, but the fact that he'd been watching her closely enough to notice such a detail made her stomach turn. Caleb started to fuss, sensing the tension in Harper's body. She rocked him automatically, her mind racing for a way out of this conversation. "I need to feed him," she said. "He's hungry." "Then feed him. I'm not stopping you." Dante pulled out a chair and sat down, making it clear he intended to watch. Harper's hand shook as she adjusted Caleb to nurse. The intimacy of it felt obscene, with Dante staring at them like they were suspects in an interrogation. She focused on her son, on his small, warm weight in her arms, on anything except the cold calculation in her husband's eyes. Dante's phone rang for the 10th time. This time he answered with barely contained rage. "What?" Harper couldn't hear the other end of the conversation, but she watched Dante's expression shift from anger to shock to something that looked almost like fear. "Say that again," Dante said slowly. "The Ferreira contract? All of it?" A pause. No, that's not possible. We had guarantees, we had assurances from—" He stopped abruptly, his eyes cutting to Harper. "I'll call you back." He hung up and sat in silence for a long moment. "Problems with the Italy deal?" Harper asked, trying to sound like she cared, like she was a concerned wife instead of the person who'd handed federal agents the evidence to dismantle his entire operation. "Nothing I can't handle." But Dante's voice lacked its usual confidence. "The Ferreira Group is claiming there were irregularities in our financial documentation. They're pulling out of the contract." "I'm sorry." "Are you?" Dante leaned back in his chair, studying her. You don't look sorry. You look almost satisfied. I'm not satisfied that your business deal fell through. I'm just trying to take care of our son. Our son? Dante's mouth twisted. I haven't even held him yet. What did you name him? Caleb. Caleb James Lane. Harper said the last name deliberately, watching for his reaction. She got one. Dante's eyes went flat and hard. Lane, you gave him your maiden name. You said you didn't care what I named him as long as he had Moretti legally. I figured we could discuss. We'll discuss it with my lawyers, and while we're at it, we'll discuss custody arrangements. The words hit like a physical blow. Custody arrangements? What are you talking about? We're married. For now. Dante stood, pacing to the window. But clearly you're not stable, Harper. Breaking windows, making scenes, giving birth in a public hospital when we have premium insurance, naming our son after your dead family instead of mine. These aren't the actions of a competent mother. You left me locked in here to die. The words came out before Harper could stop them. You disconnected my phone. You tampered with the security system. You left me no way to get help. Don't you dare talk about competence. Dante spun to face her, and for the first time, Harper saw genuine surprise on his face. You think I did that deliberately? Didn't you? Why would I? What possible reason would I have to hurt my own wife and child? Because you're a criminal, Harper thought. Because I was asking too many questions and getting too close to the truth. Because men like you eliminate problems, and I was becoming a problem. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she said, Then what happened, Dante? How did all the locks malfunction at the exact moment I went into labor? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Marcus, I need the security logs from last week. All of them. Email them to me now. A pause. I don't care if it's protocol. Do it anyway. He hung up and turned back to Harper. If someone tampered with the system, I'll find out who. And when I do, they'll regret it. The irony was almost funny. Dante was so convinced someone had sabotaged him that he couldn't see the most obvious truth. The system had worked exactly as designed. The malfunction had been his malfunction, his oversight, his failure to account for the possibility that his pregnant wife might actually go into labor while he was thousands of miles away with his mistress. Or maybe it hadn't been an oversight at all. Harper watched Dante pace and make calls and slowly lose his grip on the control that defined him, and she realized something crucial. He was starting to panic. The frozen accounts, the collapsed Italy deal, the security breach. It was all happening too fast for him to contain. He was a man used to being 3 steps ahead, and suddenly he was 10 steps behind, which made him more dangerous than ever. Caleb finished nursing and immediately spit up all over Harper's shoulder. She grabbed a burp cloth, her movements automatic after 3 days of solo parenting, and cleaned them both up. You should rest, Dante said suddenly. You just had a baby. You need sleep. The consideration in his tone was somehow more frightening than his anger had been. Harper knew better than to trust it. I'm fine. You're exhausted. I can see it. Dante moved closer, his expression softening into something that might have looked like concern to someone who didn't know better. Go lie down. I'll watch Caleb for a while. Every instinct Harper had screamed danger. She couldn't leave Caleb alone with Dante. Not now. Not when everything was unraveling and he was looking for someone to blame. He needs to stay with me. He's still learning to nurse and… Harper. Dante's voice had that edge again. Go rest. That's not a suggestion. Harper's arms tightened around Caleb. No. The word hung in the air between them, dangerous and defiant. Dante's expression went cold. What did you just say? I said no. He's my son, and I'm not leaving him. He's our son, and you're being irrational. Then I'm irrational. Harper stood, backing toward the nursery. But I'm not letting you… Dante's phone rang again, cutting off whatever she'd been about to say. He glanced at the screen and his whole body went rigid. I have to take this, he said, already moving toward his office. Stay here. Don't go anywhere. He disappeared down the hall and Harper heard the office door slam shut. She had maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. She ran to the bathroom, grabbed the burner phone from its hiding place, and texted Jonah with shaking fingers. Something's happening. His accounts are frozen. He's suspicious. I think I'm in danger. The response came back immediately. Where is he now? Office. On the phone. Can you get out? Harper looked at Caleb, then at the penthouse door. No, she typed. Not safely. Then stay. No, she typed. Not safely. Then stay calm and act normal. I'm calling Cross now. She'll know the accounts are frozen. It means they've already started moving. Help is coming. Harper wanted to believe him, but help felt very far away, and Dante's voice was rising in the office, angry and desperate in a way she'd never heard before. She shoved the phone back in its hiding spot and returned to the living room just as Dante emerged from the office. His face was pale, his eyes wild. "Pack a bag," he said. "What?" "Pack a bag. You and the baby. We're leaving." Harper's blood went cold. "Leaving? Where?" "Does it matter? Just pack what you need for a few days. We're going somewhere safe until I can sort this out." "Sort what out?" "Dante? What's happening?" "What's happening is that someone is trying to destroy me." His voice was shaking now, the facade of control completely shattered. Someone has access to information they shouldn't have. Someone has been talking to federal investigators, and I need to figure out who before everything I've built comes crashing down. He looked at Harper as he said it, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. He was adding things up, the broken windows, the convenient timing of her labor, the hospital she'd chosen, the name she'd given their son. He was starting to suspect her. "I haven't talked to anyone," Harper said, forcing her voice to stay level. "I've been here alone taking care of Caleb, that's it." "Then you won't mind coming with me. For protection." It wasn't a request. It was a threat disguised as concern. Harper's mind raced. If she got in a car with Dante now, while he was this unstable and paranoid, she might never come back. But if she refused, he'd know for certain that she was hiding something. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let me just pack some things for Caleb. Diapers, formula, clothes. You have 5 minutes." Dante checked his watch. "The car is already on its way." Harper went to the nursery on shaking legs, Caleb still in her arms. She grabbed the diaper bag with one hand and started shoving supplies into it with the other, diapers, wipes, a few changes of clothes. Her mind was screaming at her to run, to grab Caleb and just run, but she knew she wouldn't make it past the elevator before Dante caught her. She needed a plan. She needed help. She needed... Her eyes landed on the baby monitor, the one connected to an app on her phone, the suspended phone that Dante had turned off but that was still physically in the apartment. Harper made a decision. She put Caleb in his crib for just a moment, grabbed her suspended phone from the bedroom and tucked it deep in the diaper bag. If she could get to Wi-Fi somewhere, anywhere, she could turn it on and use the baby monitor app to record whatever happened next. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Harper," Dante's voice echoed down the hall. "Time's up." She grabbed Caleb and the diaper bag and forced herself to walk calmly back to the living room. Dante was waiting by the door, a black duffel bag in one hand and his laptop bag in the other. "Ready?" he asked. No, Harper thought, but she nodded anyway. They rode the elevator down in silence. Marcus was at his post in the lobby, but his eyes slid away from them as they passed, like he'd been instructed not to see anything, not to remember anything. The town car was waiting at the curb, engine running. Dante opened the back door and gestured for Harper to get in. She climbed inside with Caleb, the diaper bag clutched in her free hand like a lifeline. Dante slid in beside her and gave the driver an address Harper didn't recognize. The car pulled into traffic, and Harper watched the city slide past the tinted windows, each block taking her further from safety. "Where are we going?" she asked again. "My attorney's office. We need to establish some legal protections while everything gets sorted out." Legal protections? Harper's stomach dropped. That meant paperwork, documents, things she'd be forced to sign under duress. She thought of Jonah's warning about men like Dante always having leverage, always creating paper trails that would destroy their victims if things went wrong. What kind of protections? Power of attorney, guardianship arrangements for Caleb, standard precautionary measures. Dante was looking at his phone as he spoke, his tone too casual. "Just in case something happens to me, I need to make sure you're both taken care of." Or he was making sure that if something happened to him, Harper would go down with him. She'd seen enough of his files to know how this worked. Create documents that implicated her in his schemes, make her legally liable for his crimes, ensure that if he fell, she'd fall harder. "I don't want to sign anything right now," Harper said carefully. I just had a baby. I'm exhausted. Can't this wait a few days? No. Dante's voice was flat. It can't. The car turned onto a street Harper recognized, the financial district, all glass towers and expensive real estate. They pulled up in front of a building that probably housed a dozen law firms, and Dante's attorney was waiting at the entrance. Richard Chen was a man who specialized in making problems disappear. Harper had met him exactly twice, both times at charity events where Dante had introduced him as his legal advisor. Everything about Richard screamed expensive and morally flexible. His tailored suit, his practiced smile, his eyes that gave nothing away. Dante. Mrs. Moretti. Richard shook Dante's hand and nodded at Harper. Let's go upstairs. I have the conference room reserved. They rode up to the 14th floor in silence. Richard led them to a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A stack of documents was already laid out on the table. Please, sit. Richard gestured to the chairs. This shouldn't take long. Harper sat, settling Caleb in her lap. The baby was starting to fuss again, picking up on her anxiety. She bounced him gently, her eyes scanning the documents on the table. Power of attorney, revocable trust agreement, custody authorization. Every single one of them would give Dante complete control over her life, her son, and her future. I'm not signing these, Harper said quietly. Both men looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Harper, Dante said with forced patience, these are for your protection. No, they're for your protection. These documents make me responsible for your business decisions, give you sole authority over Caleb's care, and basically ensure that if anything happens to you, I'm the one who takes the fall. She looked at Richard. Isn't that right, Mr. Chen? Richard's expression didn't change. These are standard estate planning documents, Mrs. Moretti. Many couples don't, Harper cut him off. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is standard. I know what these documents really mean. Dante's hand came down on the table hard enough to make the papers jump. You'll sign them because I'm telling you to sign them. You're my wife. You do what I say. No. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Dante's face went dark. He stood slowly, his whole body radiating threat. Richard, give us the room. The attorney hesitated, glancing between them, then gathered his papers and left without a word. The door clicked shut, leaving Harper alone with Dante and the city spread out behind him like a beautiful, indifferent witness. You think you're very clever, don't you? Dante's voice was soft, dangerous. You think you figured something out. You think you have some kind of leverage. Harper clutched Caleb tighter, her heart pounding. I don't know what you're talking about. The accounts that were frozen weren't random. Someone gave federal investigators specific information about my business structure. Information that only a handful of people have access to. He moved closer. So I've been asking myself, who would want to hurt me? Who has had access to my office, my files, my computer? Dozens of people work for you, Dante. Your associates, your employees. None of whom have been left alone in my penthouse for days while I was out of the country. His eyes bored into hers. You've been in my office, haven't you? Going through my things? Copying my files? No. Liar. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. What did you take? What did you give them? Caleb started to cry, a sharp wail that cut through the tension. Harper tried to pull away, to comfort her son, but Dante's grip only tightened. Let go of me, Harper said, her voice shaking but firm. You're scaring the baby. Answer the question. What did you take? Nothing. I didn't take anything. Dante released her suddenly, stepping back. His phone was in his hand, and he was scrolling through something with quick, angry movements. The neighbor, he said. The one who helped you during labor. What did you say his name was? I told you, I don't know his name. You're lying. Again. Dante turned the phone to face her, and Harper's blood turned to ice. On the screen was a security photo from the building lobby. Jonah Pierce, time-stamped from 3 days ago, entering with what looked like purpose. This man was captured on our building's security system the night you broke the windows, Dante said quietly. He came from the building across the alley, forced entry into our penthouse, and then disappeared with you for 18 hours. He zoomed in on Jonah's face. I had a friend run facial recognition. Do you know who this helpful neighbor really is? Harper couldn't breathe. His name is Jonah Pierce, former forensic accountant for the FBI, specialized in financial crimes and money laundering investigations. He built cases against 3 major crime families before his partner was killed and he resigned. Dante's smile was cold. So tell me, Harper, how does a random neighbor just happen to be a federal investigator with expertise in exactly the kind of crimes I'm being accused of? The walls felt like they were closing in. Harper looked at Caleb, at Dante, at the door that might as well have been a mile away. It was a coincidence, she whispered. He heard me screaming and helped me, that's all. And I'm sure it's just a coincidence that my account started freezing the day after he met you. Hopti. Dante pocketed his phone. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign these documents, all of them, and then you're going to tell me exactly what you told Jonah Pierce and what evidence you gave to federal investigators. If you cooperate, I might let you keep visitation rights with Caleb. Visitation rights? He's my son. He's my heir. And right now, you're a liability I can't afford. Dante moved to the door. Richard. The attorney reappeared instantly, like he'd been waiting just outside. Mrs. Moretti needs some time to think about what's best for her family, Dante said smoothly. Why don't you explain to her exactly what happens to uncooperative wives in custody disputes, especially ones who might be charged as accomplices in their husband's alleged crimes? Richard sat down across from Harper, his expression professional and utterly unmoved by her obvious distress. In the state of California, family courts consider many factors when determining custody. A mother's stability, her ability to provide a safe home, her mental fitness. Harper stopped listening. She was calculating distances. To the door, to the elevator, to anywhere that wasn't this room with these men who saw her and her son as nothing more than leverage. Caleb's cries had quieted to small hiccuping sobs. Harper rocked him automatically, her mind racing through every bad option she had left. She could sign the documents and become complicit in Dante's crimes. She could refuse and lose her son in a custody battle she had no resources to fight. She could run and become a fugitive. She could call for help and pray someone answered before Dante silenced her permanently. None of them were good, but one of them might at least keep Caleb safe. Harper looked up at Richard Chen with her best impression of a woman who'd been broken into submission. I need to use the restroom, and I need privacy to nurse the baby. Richard glanced at Dante, who nodded curtly. Down the hall, second door on the left, Richard said. Don't take too long. Harper stood on shaking legs and carried Caleb out of the conference room. The hallway was empty, quiet except for the hum of expensive air conditioning and her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She went to the bathroom, locked the door, and pulled out the diaper bag with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Her suspended phone was still there, buried under diapers and baby clothes. She pulled it out and turned it on, praying there was enough residual battery life for what she needed to do. The phone powered up but showed no service, still suspended. But there was Wi-Fi. The building's guest network was password protected, but Harper had watched Dante connect to it before at a different law office in the same building. She tried the same password. Legal Eagle 2019. It worked. Harper's suspended phone connected to Wi-Fi, and suddenly she had access to everything. Her apps, her messages, everything Dante thought he'd cut her off from. Her fingers flew across the screen, pulling up the baby monitor app and starting a recording. She tucked the phone deep in Caleb's diaper bag, microphone exposed, and turned on the monitor. Then she pulled out the burner phone and texted Jonah. Chen and Associates Law Office, 14th floor. He knows about you. He's trying to make me sign documents. Please help. She sent the same message to the number Jonah had given her for Agent Miranda Cross, along with a screenshot of the power of attorney documents. It was all she could do. Harper deleted the messages, hid the burner phone, and forced herself to breathe slowly. She splashed water on her face, checked her reflection, and tried to look like a woman who'd accepted her fate instead of a woman who'd just lit a fuse and was praying the explosion came fast enough. When she walked back into the conference room, Dante was on his phone again, his back to the window. Richard had the documents spread out, a pen positioned neatly beside them. Better? Dante asked without looking at her. Yes. Good. Then let's finish this. He finally turned to face her, and his expression was almost gentle. Sign the papers, Harper. Make this easy on everyone. Harper sat down and picked up the pen. She pulled the first document toward her. The power of attorney that would make her legally responsible for Dante's business decisions. She read it slowly, carefully, while both men watched her with barely concealed impatience. This clause here, Harper said, pointing to a section halfway down the page. It says, I acknowledge full awareness of all business dealings and financial structures associated with Meridian Holdings, Coastal Import Services, and Summit Distribution LLC. She watched Dante's expression carefully as she named the shell companies she'd photographed. He went very, very still. So if I sign this, Harper continued, her voice steady now, I'm essentially confessing to knowing about the money laundering, the fraud, the forged documents, all of it. I become complicit, an accomplice. Those are legitimate business entities, Richard said smoothly. The language is standard for... I found the external hard drive, Harper said quietly, looking directly at Dante. The one you kept locked in your desk drawer. I saw the spreadsheets, the communications about shipments, the offshore accounts. I photographed everything. The silence that fell was absolute. Dante's face had gone white. What did you do? I gave it to the FBI. The lie came out smooth and confident. She hadn't given it to them yet. Jonah was supposed to be the intermediary, but Dante didn't need to know that. 3 days ago. That's why your accounts are frozen. That's why the Ferreira deal collapsed. That's why everything is falling apart. You stupid... Dante lunged toward her, and Harper scrambled backward, clutching Caleb. Richard jumped between them, hands up. Dante, not here, not in my office. But Dante wasn't listening. His eyes were wild, trapped. The eyes of a man who'd just realized he'd been outmaneuvered by the person he'd most underestimated. You have no idea what you've done, he breathed. The people I work with, the connections I have, you think the FBI can protect you? You think federal custody is going to save you? I think it's better than being your prisoner. Harper's voice shook but held. And I think Agent Miranda Cross is very interested in talking to me about protective custody and immunity in exchange for testimony. The color drained from Richard's face. He stepped away from Dante, his professional mask slipping. I need to make a call. Excuse me. He practically ran from the room. Harper and Dante faced each other across the conference table, her holding their son, him holding nothing but rage and the crumbling remains of his empire. This isn't over, Dante said softly. You're still my wife. Caleb is still my son. And I promise you, Harper, you will regret this. Maybe, Harper said, but at least I'll regret it free. Dante's phone rang, a different ringtone, one Harper had never heard before. He looked at the screen and his face went ashen. He answered without speaking, listened for 10 seconds, and hung up. We're leaving, he said. Now. I'm not going anywhere with you. You don't have a choice. But even as he said it, Harper heard something she'd never heard in Dante's voice before. Uncertainty. The conference room door burst open. Richard stood in the doorway, his expensive suit rumpled, his careful composure completely shattered. The FBI is in the lobby, he said. They're on their way up. Dante's eyes cut to Harper, and in that moment she saw him make a calculation. Grab her and Caleb as hostages, or run while he still could. He chose to run. Dante grabbed his laptop bag and headed for the door, then stopped and looked back at her one last time. This isn't mercy, Harper. This is strategy. When they can't make their case stick, when you realize what you've done, when you need me to make all of this go away, you'll come back. They always do. Then he was gone, Richard scrambling after him, leaving Harper alone in the conference room with Caleb and the unsigned documents scattered across the table. She heard shouting in the hallway, authoritative voices demanding people stop, doors slamming, the chaos of a raid in progress. Harper stayed where she was, holding her son, waiting for whatever came next. The door opened, and a woman in a dark suit stepped inside. She had sharp eyes, graying hair pulled back in a bun, and the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention. Mrs. Moretti, the woman said, I'm Special Agent Miranda Cross. I think we need to talk. Closed the door behind her. Closed the door behind her, cutting off the chaos in the hallway, and gestured to the chair across from Harper. May I sit? Harper nodded, her arms instinctively tightening around Caleb. The baby had fallen asleep despite everything, his small body warm and trusting against her chest. Miranda sat and folded her hands on the table, her eyes taking in Harper's disheveled appearance, the diaper bag, the unsigned documents still scattered across the polished surface. "First things first," Miranda said. "Are you hurt? Do you or your baby need medical attention?" "No, we're okay." "Good. Second, do you know where your husband went?" Harper shook her head. "He ran when you arrived. I don't know where he'd go." Miranda's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "We have agents at every exit. He won't get far." She pulled out a small recording device and set it on the table between them. "I need to ask you some questions, Mrs. Moretti. You're not under arrest and you're free to leave at any time. But I strongly suggest you talk to me before you make any decisions about what comes next. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Do you want a lawyer present?" Harper thought about Richard Chen, about the documents designed to implicate her, about how Dante's lawyers would twist everything to protect him and destroy her. "No," she said quietly. "I want immunity." Miranda's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a very specific request. What makes you think you need immunity?" "Because my husband has spent months building a paper trail that makes me look complicit in his crimes. He had documents ready for me to sign today that would have made me legally responsible for shell companies I didn't even know existed until last week." Harper gestured at the power of attorney forms. "He's been setting me up from the beginning, making sure that if he went down, I'd go down with him." Miranda picked up one of the documents and scanned it quickly. Her jaw tightened. "These are extremely incriminating. If you'd signed them..." "I know. That's why I didn't." "But you did have access to his files. Jonah Pierce sent me the photographs you took, bank statements, communications, financial records." Miranda leaned forward. "How did you get that information, Mrs. Moretti?" Harper met her eyes steadily. "I went through his office while he was in Italy. I photographed everything I could find that looked suspicious. I didn't steal anything. I didn't tamper with evidence. I just documented what was already there." "Why?" The question was simple, but the answer was complicated. Harper looked down at Caleb, his tiny fingers curled against her shirt, completely dependent on her to keep him safe. "Because he locked me in our penthouse and left me to die in labor," Harper said, her voice breaking. "Because I realized that the man I married wasn't who I thought he was. Because I was terrified he was going to take my son away from me, and I needed leverage to protect us both." Miranda was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to be honest with you, Harper. May I call you Harper?" "Yes." "The evidence you collected is compelling, but it's not enough on its own. We've been investigating Dante Moretti's organization for 8 months. We know he's running money for several criminal enterprises: drug trafficking, illegal gambling, possibly human trafficking. We know he uses shell companies and offshore accounts to launder funds. What we don't have is the kind of insider testimony that would make a case stick in court." Harper's stomach dropped. "You want me to testify against him?" "I want you to have the option, but first I need to understand exactly what you know and what you can prove." Miranda tapped the recording device. "So let's start from the beginning. When did you first suspect your husband was involved in illegal activity?" The next 2 hours were the longest of Harper's life. She told Miranda everything: about the marriage that had started as a fairy tale and turned into a cage, about the financial control and isolation, about the $50 and the disconnected phone and the locked doors. She described finding the Meridian Holdings folder, the external hard drive, the communications about shipments and packages. She explained how Jonah had helped her understand what she was looking at, how to document it, how to protect herself. Miranda listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad, her expression giving nothing away. When Harper finally finished, exhausted and hoarse, Miranda sat back and studied her for a long moment. "You understand what testifying would mean," Miranda said carefully. "You'd be the government's primary witness against a man with deep connections to organized crime. Your life would change completely. You'd need protection, relocation possibly, a new identity if the threat level was high enough." "What about Caleb?" "He'd be protected too. But Harper, I need you to understand something crucial. Once you commit to this path, there's no going back. You can't change your mind halfway through. You can't reconcile with your husband or try to work things out. This is permanent." Harper thought about the penthouse, with its beautiful prison windows, about the $50 and the grocery list, about Dante's cold eyes when he'd grabbed her arm and demanded to know what she'd taken. She thought about the kind of man who would leave his 9 months pregnant wife locked in an apartment with no way to call for help. "I don't want to go back," Harper said quietly. "I want immunity. I want full custody of Caleb with no visitation rights for Dante, and I want enough financial support to start over somewhere he can't find us. Can you make that happen?" Miranda's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I can't make promises about custody. That's family court, not federal. But I can offer you immunity from prosecution for any crimes you may have been unknowingly involved in. I can provide witness protection if the threat level warrants it. And I can make sure the U.S. Attorney's Office knows that you're a cooperating witness who deserves consideration." "What do I have to do?" "First, you need to give me everything. Every photo, every document, every piece of information you collected. Then you need to tell me everything you remember about Dante's business, names, dates, conversations. Anything that might help us build a timeline." Miranda paused. "And eventually you'll need to testify in front of a grand jury and possibly at trial." Harper's hands were shaking. She looked down at Caleb, still sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the fact that his mother was about to tear apart his father's entire world. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." Miranda reached across the table and covered Harper's hand with her own. The gesture was brief, professional, but it carried a weight of understanding that made Harper's eyes sting with tears. "You're making the right choice," Miranda said. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you are." The door opened and another agent stuck his head in. "Cross, we have a situation." Miranda stood immediately. "What kind of situation?" "Moretti's attorney is demanding to speak with his client. Says Mrs. Moretti is being held against her will, and he's filing for emergency custody of the minor child." Harper's blood went cold. "He can't do that, can he?" Miranda's expression hardened. "He can try, but he won't succeed." She turned to the other agent. "Where's Moretti now?" "In custody. We got him at the parking garage. He had $50,000 in cash, a burner phone, and 2 passports, one real, one fake." A grim smile crossed Miranda's face. "Flight risk. Perfect." She looked back at Harper. "Stay here. Don't sign anything. Don't talk to anyone except me or Agent Reeves here. Understood?" Harper nodded, and Miranda swept out of the room with Agent Reeves in tow. The door closed, leaving Harper alone again with her thoughts and her sleeping son, and the growing realization of what she'd just set in motion. She pulled out the diaper bag and checked on her suspended phone, still recording through the baby monitor app. She stopped the recording and saved it, then pulled up the photos she'd taken of Dante's files. Hundreds of them, all time-stamped, all carefully documented. Evidence, proof, ammunition. Her hands found the burner phone next, and she texted Jonah. "I'm with Agent Cross. Dante's in custody. I'm cooperating." The response came within seconds. "Good. You did the right thing. Are you safe?" "For now. His lawyer is trying to get emergency custody of Caleb." "He won't get it. Not with Dante in federal custody for flight risk. Stay calm. Cross is good at what she does." Harper wanted to believe that, but she knew how the world worked, knew that men like Dante had resources and connections that could reach into places regular people couldn't imagine. She'd just declared war on someone who had the money and motivation to destroy her completely. Caleb stirred, making small, hungry sounds. Harper shifted him to nurse, grateful for the distraction of something normal and necessary in the middle of all this chaos. She was just getting him latched when the door opened again. This time, it was a woman in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than Harper's entire wardrobe. She had steel gray hair, sharp eyes behind designer glasses, and the kind of presence that made it clear she was used to being the most important person in any room. "Mrs. Moretti, I'm Patricia Summers. I'm an attorney specializing in family law, and I've been retained to represent your interests in this matter." Harper blinked. "I didn't hire a lawyer. Agent Cross did, on behalf of the federal government. You're a cooperating witness now, which means you're entitled to legal representation separate from your husband's counsel." Patricia sat down and opened her briefcase with crisp efficiency. "I've already filed emergency motions to freeze all joint assets, prevent your husband from accessing any accounts in your name, and establish temporary sole custody of your son. I've also requested a restraining order preventing Dante Moretti from contacting you or the child." The professional competence was almost overwhelming. Harper had spent so long being told what she couldn't do, what she wasn't allowed to have, that having someone fight for her interests felt surreal. "Thank you," Harper managed. "Don't thank me yet. We have a lot of work ahead of us." Patricia pulled out a legal pad. "First, I need you to tell me about every asset you know your husband controls. Bank accounts, properties, vehicles, investments, anything and everything." Harper tried to focus, tried to remember all the financial documents she'd seen in Dante's office. "There's the penthouse, obviously, and a house in Malibu I've only seen once. He has multiple cars, a Mercedes, a BMW, something Italian I can't pronounce. There are the offshore accounts I photographed, and the shell companies, and—" She stopped, a memory surfacing. "Wait, there's a safe. In the penthouse behind a painting in the bedroom. I saw him open it once. There was cash inside, a lot of it, and some kind of ledger or notebook." Patricia's pen paused. "Did you photograph the contents?" "No, I didn't know the combination. I only saw inside because he opened it while I was in the room and didn't realize I was paying attention." "Do you remember what you saw?" Harper closed her eyes, trying to pull up the memory. Stacks of hundreds, wrapped in paper bands, maybe $200,000 or $300,000, and a black notebook, the kind with a leather cover. He put some papers inside and locked it again. Patricia was writing rapidly. "This is good. This is very good. A personal ledger could contain information that didn't make it into his digital records, the kind of thing that proves intent and knowledge." She looked up. "Can you get back into that penthouse?" "I don't know. Maybe. It's my legal residence, but Dante controls the building security." "Leave that to me. I'll coordinate with Agent Cross. If we can get a warrant for that safe, we might find exactly what we need to—" The door burst open, and Miranda strode in with an expression that made Harper's heart sink. "We have a problem," Miranda said without preamble. "Dante's claiming the evidence you collected was obtained illegally. He says you broke into his private office, accessed password-protected files without authorization, and violated attorney-client privilege by photographing communications with his lawyers." Harper's stomach dropped. "But it's my home too. I'm his wife. I didn't break into anything." "Spousal privilege is complicated," Patricia interrupted. "In California, you have a legal right to access shared property. But if Dante can prove his office was exclusively his private space and you were explicitly forbidden from entering it, he might have a case for suppression of evidence." "That's insane!" Harper's voice rose, startling Caleb. She forced herself to breathe, to stay calm. "He locked me in that apartment. He tried to kill me. And now he's going to hide behind legal technicalities?" "That's exactly what he's going to do," Miranda said grimly. "His lawyer is already filing motions to exclude all the photographic evidence. If those motions succeed, we lose the majority of our case." The room fell silent except for Caleb's soft breathing and the distant sound of voices in the hallway. Harper felt like she was drowning, like every step forward she'd taken was being yanked back twice as far. "What about the recording?" she said suddenly. Both women looked at her. "What recording?" Miranda asked carefully. Harper pulled out her suspended phone and held it up. "When Dante brought me here, I turned this on and hid it in the diaper bag. I've been recording everything. The conversation in the conference room, him admitting to the shell companies, him threatening me, all of it." Patricia's eyes widened. "You recorded him without his knowledge or consent?" "Yes. Is that illegal?" "California is a two-party consent state," Patricia said slowly, "which means recording someone without their permission is generally illegal. But—" She held up a finger. "There are exceptions for situations involving imminent harm or criminal activity, and if Dante threatened you or your child, that could qualify." Miranda held out her hand. "Let me hear it." Harper pulled up the audio file and hit play. Dante's voice filled the conference room, cold and threatening. "You're still my wife. Caleb is still my son. And I promise you, Harper, you will regret this." Then Richard's voice. "The FBI is in the lobby. They're on their way up." And finally Dante's last words to her. "When they can't make their case stick, when you realize what you've done, when you need me to make all of this go away, you'll come back. They always do." Miranda's expression was unreadable as the recording ended. "How much else is there?" "About 45 minutes total. Most of it is from the conference room, Dante pressuring me to sign the documents, threatening to take Caleb away, admitting to the shell companies when I named them." Patricia leaned forward. "Did he say anything specific about the nature of those companies? About where the money came from, or where it was going?" Harper scrubbed through the audio, trying to remember. There, listen to this part. She played a section where Dante's voice was sharp with panic. You have no idea what you've done. The people I work with, the connections I have, you think the FBI can protect you? And then a few minutes later, when they can't make their case stick, Miranda stopped the recording. He's admitting to working with other people. Connections. That's conspiracy. And he's threatening a federal witness, Patricia added. That's obstruction. The question is whether we can use it in court, Miranda said. Harper, I need you to think very carefully. When Dante made these statements, did you feel like you or Caleb were in imminent danger? Harper remembered the conference room, the way Dante had lunged at her, the wild look in his eyes when he'd realized what she'd done. Yes, she said quietly. He grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. He threatened to take my son away. He told his lawyer to explain what happens to uncooperative wives in custody disputes. I was terrified. Good. That's our exception to the two-party consent rule. Miranda pulled out her phone. I'm calling the U.S. attorney right now. This changes everything. Patricia was already typing on her laptop. I'm amending our emergency motions. This recording establishes a credible threat to you and the child, which strengthens our case for sole custody and the restraining order. Harper sat back, Caleb heavy and warm in her arms, and watched these two powerful women dismantle her husband's defenses with the same ruthless efficiency he'd once used to control her life. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The next several hours blurred together in a chaos of legal proceedings Harper barely understood. She was moved to a safe room in the federal building, given food and supplies for Caleb, and interviewed by 3 different agents who all wanted to hear her story from slightly different angles. Patricia stayed with her through all of it, redirecting questions that were too invasive and making sure Harper's rights were protected. Night fell, and Harper found herself in a hotel room under federal protection. Not one of the luxury places Dante would have chosen, but clean and safe, and most importantly, anonymous. Agent Reeves was stationed outside her door. Another agent was in the lobby. She was as protected as she could be under the circumstances. But Harper couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dante's face in that conference room, the moment he'd realized she'd betrayed him. She kept reaching for her phone, forgetting that it was still suspended, that she had no one to call anyway. Except she did have someone. Harper pulled out the burner phone and texted Jonah. Are you awake? The response came immediately. Yeah, can't sleep either. How are you holding up? I don't know. Scared, exhausted, wondering if I did the right thing. You did. Trust me on that. Harper hesitated, then typed. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you really help me? I know you said it was because of what happened to your partner, but there's more to it, isn't there? The 3 typing dots appeared and disappeared several times before Jonah's response came through. Sarah wasn't just my partner. She was my wife. We kept it quiet because the Bureau had rules about married agents working together. But we were a team in every way. Harper's chest tightened. I'm so sorry. She was investigating the same kind of operation your husband runs, money moving through legitimate businesses to hide criminal activity. She got close to proving it, and they killed her to shut her up. Made it look like a robbery gone wrong. Another pause. I've spent 3 years wishing I could go back and do things differently. Help her see the danger before it was too late. Get her out before they got to her. When I saw you in that window, screaming for help, it was like the universe was giving me a second chance. To save someone. To save someone who deserved to be saved. You're not a criminal, Harper. You're a victim who found the courage to fight back. That's rare. Harper wiped at her eyes, surprised to find them wet. I don't feel courageous. I feel terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing even when you're scared out of your mind. You've got that in spades. They texted back and forth for another hour, Jonah telling her stories about Sarah, about the cases they'd worked, about the life they'd planned that never happened. Harper told him about her parents, about the art gallery where she'd worked, about the person she used to be before Dante. Finally, around 3 a.m, Jonah typed, You should try to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. What happens tomorrow? Tomorrow you start building your new life, one piece at a time. Harper wanted to believe that was possible. She looked at Caleb, asleep in the travel crib the FBI had provided, and tried to imagine a future where they were safe and free and no longer defined by Dante's shadow. It felt impossible. But then again, escaping from a locked penthouse while in active labor had felt impossible too. The next morning, Harper woke to a knock on the door and Agent Reeves announcing that Patricia Summers was here to see her. Harper threw on clean clothes, provided by the FBI from a generic shopping trip, and answered the door with Caleb in her arms. Patricia swept in carrying 2 coffee cups and a bag from a bakery down the street. "Breakfast. You need to eat something before we go to court." "Court?" "Emergency custody hearing. Dante's lawyer is pushing hard, and the judge wants to hear from both sides before making a ruling." Patricia handed Harper a coffee. "Agent Cross will be there to testify about the ongoing investigation and the threat level. I'll present the evidence of Dante's financial control and the locked penthouse incident. But Harper, you need to be prepared. You're going to have to face him." Harper's hands shook, sloshing coffee over the rim of the cup. "He'll be there?" "His lawyer will definitely be there. Dante himself might be if the marshals transport him from custody. But you won't be alone. I'll be right beside you, and there will be federal agents in the courtroom." Patricia's expression softened. "I know this is hard, but you're going to walk in there with your head up, you're going to tell the truth, and you're going to show that judge exactly who deserves to raise your son." 3 hours later, Harper sat in a family courtroom that smelled like floor polish and recycled air, Caleb in her arms, Patricia at her side. Across the aisle, Richard Chen sat with an empty chair beside him. Dante was still in federal custody and hadn't been cleared for transport. The judge was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and an expression that suggested she'd seen every kind of family dysfunction imaginable and was tired of all of it. "This is an emergency hearing regarding custody of the minor child Caleb James Lane Moretti," the judge said, reading from her notes. "The mother, Harper Lane Moretti, is requesting sole custody with supervised visitation for the father, Dante Moretti, who is currently in federal custody on unrelated charges. Mr. Chen, you're representing the father?" Richard stood. "Yes, Your Honor. My client maintains that Mrs. Moretti is an unfit mother who has been cooperating with federal investigators to falsely incriminate him in criminal activities. He believes the child is being used as leverage in a federal investigation and requests immediate joint custody to protect his parental rights." The judge's eyebrows rose. "The child is 4 days old. You're requesting joint custody of a 4-day-old infant whose father is in federal custody?" "We're requesting that my client's parental rights be protected, Your Honor. Mrs. Moretti has already demonstrated a pattern of deception, but I'd like to hear from Mrs. Moretti's counsel before you continue," the judge interrupted. "Ms. Summers." Patricia stood with the controlled confidence of someone who'd won cases in far more hostile courtrooms than this. "Your Honor, my client is the victim of severe financial abuse, isolation, and most recently a deliberate attempt on her life and the life of her unborn child. She has cooperated with federal investigators to protect herself and her son from a man who has demonstrated a complete disregard for their safety and well-being." She laid out the evidence methodically: the disconnected phone, the locked penthouse, the $50 allowance, the emergency delivery at a public hospital. She entered into evidence the photos of the grocery list, the bank statements showing Harper had no access to funds, and finally, the recording of Dante threatening to take Caleb away. The judge listened to the recording with an expression that grew increasingly grim. "Mr. Chen," she said when it ended, "your client threatened to use custody proceedings as punishment for his wife's cooperation with federal investigators. That's not protecting parental rights. That's weaponizing the court system." "Your Honor, those statements were made under extreme duress. My client had just learned that his wife had betrayed his trust and said—" "His trust?" The judge's voice could have cut glass. "His wife was locked in an apartment with no phone access while 9 months pregnant. Where was his trust when he left her in that situation?" Richard opened his mouth and closed it again. The judge turned to Harper. "Mrs. Moretti, I'd like to hear from you directly. Can you tell me in your own words why you believe sole custody is in your son's best interest?" Harper stood on shaking legs, Caleb cradled against her chest. She thought about all the practiced speeches Patricia had helped her prepare, all the careful legal language designed to make her sound reasonable and competent. Instead, she told the truth. "I married a man I thought I loved," Harper said quietly. I thought he would protect me and take care of me. Instead, he controlled every aspect of my life. Where I went, who I talked to, what I bought at the grocery store. He made me feel like I was crazy for asking questions, like I was ungrateful for wanting basic human dignity. Her voice strengthened. And when I was at my most vulnerable, when I was in labor and terrified, he left me locked in our home with no way to get help. If a neighbor hadn't heard me screaming and broken down the door, Caleb and I would both be dead. She looked directly at Richard Chen. I don't know if Dante meant to kill us. Maybe it was just indifference. Maybe he genuinely didn't think about what would happen. But either way, he left us to die. And I will do everything in my power to make sure he never has the chance to hurt my son the way he hurt me. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The judge was quiet for a long moment, then she picked up her gavel. I'm granting temporary sole custody to Harper Lane Moretti. Mr. Dante Moretti's parental rights are suspended pending the outcome of the federal investigation. All visitation will be supervised and subject to approval by this court. I'm also issuing a restraining order preventing Mr. Moretti from contacting Mrs. Moretti or the minor child except through legal counsel. She looked at Richard. Your client can file an appeal when he's no longer in federal custody. Until then, he has no custodial rights. We're adjourned. The gavel came down and Harper's legs gave out. Patricia caught her, steadying her, while Caleb started to cry, as if he understood that something monumental had just happened. You did it, Patricia said quietly. He can't touch you now. But Harper knew better than to feel safe. Men like Dante didn't accept defeat gracefully. They regrouped, they planned, they came back harder. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Harper's instinct proved correct 3 days later when Agent Miranda Cross called her into the federal building for what she described as an urgent development. Harper arrived with Caleb strapped to her chest in a carrier Patricia had bought her, still living out of the FBI-provided hotel room, still jumping at every unexpected sound. Miranda met her in the lobby with an expression that made Harper's stomach drop. What happened? Harper asked. Selena Vale walked into our field office this morning and asked for a deal. Miranda guided Harper toward the elevators. She's willing to testify against Dante in exchange for immunity. Harper's first reaction was relief. More evidence meant a stronger case, but Miranda's grim expression suggested there was more to it. They rode up to the 7th floor in silence. Miranda led Harper to a conference room where Selena sat with her own attorney, looking nothing like the polished woman who'd walked out of the penthouse with Dante. Her cream silk blouse was wrinkled, her perfect hair pulled into a messy ponytail, and her eyes were red-rimmed like she hadn't slept in days. When Selena saw Harper, something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or shame. Mrs. Moretti, Selena's attorney said, standing. I'm David Brennan, Ms. Vale's counsel. My client has information that's relevant to both the federal investigation and your custody case. Agent Cross thought you should hear it directly. Harper sat down slowly, adjusting Caleb in the carrier. I'm listening. Selena wouldn't meet her eyes. She stared at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. The penthouse locks. The security system malfunctioned. It wasn't an accident. The room went very still. What are you saying? Harper's voice was steady, despite the ice spreading through her veins. Dante asked me to disable the internal release mechanisms before we left for Italy. Selena's words came faster now, like she'd been holding them in too long. He said you'd been snooping around his office, that he needed to teach you a lesson about boundaries. He told me to make it look like a system glitch. Said you'd be uncomfortable for a few hours until Maria came to check on you, and then you'd understand who was in control. Harper's hands clenched on the edge of the table. I was 9 months pregnant. I know. I told him it was too dangerous, that you could go into labor, but he said first babies are always late, that it would be fine. Selena finally looked up, and her eyes were swimming with tears. I didn't know he'd also disconnected your phone. I didn't know he'd told Maria not to come for a week. I swear I thought it would just be a few hours. You thought wrong, Harper's voice was ice. I almost died. My son almost died, because you helped my husband lock me in a cage. I know, and I'm sorry, Don't. Harper cut her off. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to Caleb when he's old enough to understand that you nearly killed him before he was born. Selena flinched like she'd been slapped. Miranda leaned forward. Ms. Vale, I need you to state for the record exactly what Mr. Moretti asked you to do and when. Selena's attorney nodded, and Selena took a shaky breath. 3 days before we left for Italy, Dante showed me how to access the building's security system remotely. He had administrator credentials that let him control individual units. He walked me through disabling the internal door releases and the emergency override for the penthouse windows. He made me practice it twice to make sure I could do it without leaving a trace in the logs. "Why did he want the windows disabled?" Miranda asked. "He said you'd been threatening to throw yourself out if he left you alone." Selena's voice dropped. "He said you were unstable, that you'd made suicide threats before, that he needed to protect you from yourself." Harper felt sick. Even in his cruelty, Dante had been building a narrative. The unstable wife, the concerned husband, the tragic accident that wasn't really his fault. "Did you believe him?" Harper asked quietly. Selena hesitated, then shook her head. "Not really, but I didn't care. I wanted you out of the picture, and if Dante was willing to do the dirty work, I wasn't going to stop him." The honesty was almost worse than the lies. Miranda pulled out a file folder. "Miss Val has also provided us with detailed information about Mr. Moretti's financial operations. Shell companies, offshore accounts, cash movements. She served as his de facto CFO for the past 18 months. "I managed the books," Selena said. "I moved money between accounts, created false invoices, laundered proceeds from drug sales and illegal gambling operations through legitimate businesses. I knew everything Dante was doing because I was the one making it look legal." Harper stared at this woman who'd smiled at her like a predator, who'd walked out of the penthouse laughing about place and obedience, who'd nearly killed her and her unborn child out of pure ambition. "Why are you telling us this now?" Harper asked. "Because Dante tried to make me the fall guy." Selena's voice hardened. "The second he got arrested, he started telling the feds that I was the mastermind, that I'd manipulated him, that he had no idea what I was doing with his money. He was willing to let me go to prison for 30 years to save himself." "So this isn't about doing the right thing," Harper said. "This is about revenge." "Does it matter?" Selena met her eyes finally. "Whether I'm cooperating out of guilt or self-preservation, the result is the same. Dante goes to prison for a very long time." Harper looked at Miranda. "Can you use her testimony?" "Absolutely. Testimony from a co-conspirator who handled the financial operations is exactly what we need to prove Dante's knowledge and intent." Miranda closed the file. "Ms. Vale's cooperation also gives us leverage to flip other members of the organization. Once they realize his lieutenant turned on him, the dominoes will start falling." "What happens to her?" Harper gestured at Selena. "Immunity in exchange for full cooperation and testimony," Miranda said. "She'll still face civil penalties, and she'll never work in finance again, but she won't see the inside of a prison cell." The injustice of it burned in Harper's chest. Selena had nearly killed her, had helped Dante build his criminal empire, had destroyed lives for profit and ambition, and she was going to walk away free. But Harper was learning that justice and fairness weren't always the same thing. "Fine," Harper said. "Use her testimony. Do whatever you need to do to make sure Dante never gets out." Over the next 6 weeks, Harper learned what it meant to be a federal witness. She gave 17 depositions, identified hundreds of documents, and spent hours with prosecutors preparing for the grand jury testimony that would determine whether Dante faced trial. She also learned what it meant to be a single mother with no money and no home. The FBI put her up in extended stay housing and gave her a stipend for expenses, but it wasn't enough to cover diapers and formula and the mounting costs of keeping a newborn alive. Patricia filed motions to access the frozen marital assets, but Dante's lawyers fought every request, arguing that Harper wasn't entitled to funds from accounts she'd helped the FBI freeze. Harper was living on $50 a week again, except this time she'd chosen it rather than having it imposed on her. That made all the difference. She was folding laundry in her tiny hotel room when someone knocked on the door. Agent Reeves checked the peephole and stepped aside, and Jonah walked in carrying 2 bags from the grocery store. "You didn't have to do this," Harper said, but she was already reaching for the bags, grateful beyond words. "I know." Jonah started unpacking formula, diapers, fresh vegetables, things Harper couldn't afford on her FBI stipend. "But I wanted to." He'd been visiting regularly since the custody hearing, always with some excuse, dropping off case files, checking on her safety, making sure she had what she needed. Harper had started to realize that Jonah's help wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about something gentler, something that made her chest feel warm and tight when he smiled at Caleb or helped her carry the diaper bag, or stayed to talk long after he'd delivered whatever excuse had brought him there. The grand jury testimony is next week, Harper said, putting away groceries. Miranda says it should be straightforward. I just tell them what I found, how I found it, and what Dante said in the recording. Are you nervous? Terrified. Harper picked up Caleb, who'd started fussing in his bassinet. What if I mess up? What if I forget something important? What if the defense tears me apart on cross-examination? There's no cross-examination in grand jury testimony, Jonah reminded her gently. It's just you and the prosecutors and the jurors. You tell your story, and they decide if there's enough evidence to indict. And if there's not, there will be. Between your evidence, Selena's testimony, and the financial records the FBI has been pulling, this is the most solid racketeering case I've seen in years. Jonah sat on the edge of the bed, watching her rock Caleb. Dante's going down, Harper. It's just a matter of time. Harper wanted to believe that, but she'd learned not to count on things until they actually happened. The grand jury testimony came and went in a blur of questions and exhibits and sworn statements. Harper told her story to a room full of strangers who listened with varying degrees of sympathy and skepticism. She identified documents, authenticated recordings, and explained in careful detail how she'd found the evidence that was now being used to dismantle her husband's empire. When it was over, Miranda met her in the hallway with a smile that reached her eyes for the first time since Harper had met her. They voted to indict, Miranda said. Racketeering, money laundering, fraud, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to commit human trafficking. Dante's looking at 40 years minimum if convicted. Harper's knees went weak. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. What happens now? She asked. Now we build the case for trial. Dante's team will file every motion they can think of to exclude evidence, delay proceedings, and make your life difficult. But we've got him, Harper. The indictment is sealed for 72 hours, and then it goes public. Once that happens, everyone will know what kind of man Dante Moretti really is. The indictment went public on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, it was the lead story on every news outlet in the city. Prominent businessman arrested for running a massive criminal enterprise, using luxury real estate and legitimate companies to launder drug money and gambling proceeds. The talking heads on television debated whether his wife was a victim or a co-conspirator, whether she'd known what he was doing, whether her testimony could be trusted. Harper watched the coverage from her hotel room and felt nothing but a cold, distant satisfaction. Let them talk. Let them question her motives. At least now everyone knew the truth about the man behind the expensive suits and the charitable donations. Her phone, the burner Jonah had given her, buzzed with a text from Patricia. Emergency hearing tomorrow. Dante's team is making a last push for custody. Be ready. Harper's stomach dropped. She thought this was over. She thought the restraining order and the federal indictment had ended Dante's ability to hurt her through the courts. She should have known better. The next morning, Harper walked into the same family courtroom where she'd won temporary custody 6 weeks ago. But this time, Dante was there in person, wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals, but there nonetheless. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and the hatred in his gaze made Harper's blood run cold. This was a man who'd lost everything and blamed her for all of it. This was a man who had nothing left to lose. The judge called the hearing to order. Mr. Chen, you've filed an emergency motion to modify custody. Please state your grounds. Richard stood, looking significantly less polished than he had 6 weeks ago. Your Honor, my client maintains that Mrs. Moretti deliberately destroyed his life and his business based on fabricated evidence and lies. He believes his son is being raised by a woman who has proven herself willing to lie, cheat, and manipulate to get what she wants. He's requesting immediate supervised visitation and a full custody evaluation. Your Honor, Patricia said without standing, Mr. Moretti is currently under federal indictment for racketeering, money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy to commit human trafficking. He's being held without bail because he's a flight risk. He used a fake passport and attempted to flee the country. And now he wants to argue that his wife is unfit? The judge looked at Dante over her reading glasses. Mr. Moretti, you're facing 40 years in federal prison if convicted. Even if I granted you visitation rights, which I'm not inclined to do, how exactly would you exercise them from a jail cell? Dante leaned toward his attorney and whispered something. Richard nodded and stood again. My client wishes to address the court directly, Your Honor. The judge sighed. This is highly irregular, but go ahead. Dante stood as much as the shackles would allow. When he spoke, his voice was the same smooth, controlled tone Harper remembered from their marriage. The voice that had once convinced her he loved her, that had made her believe his lies. Your Honor, I made mistakes. I admit that. I got involved in business dealings that crossed legal lines, and I'm prepared to face the consequences of those choices. He paused, his eyes finding Harper's. But I never stopped loving my wife, and I never stopped wanting to be a father to my son. Harper's hands clenched in her lap. Harper was lonely in our marriage, Dante continued. I traveled too much, worked too hard, didn't give her the attention she deserved. When she found out she was pregnant, I think she saw an opportunity to get my attention back. She started asking questions about my business, going through my files, looking for leverage. That's a lie, Harper said before she could stop herself. The judge held up a hand. Mrs. Moretti, you'll have your chance to speak. Mr. Moretti, continue. When I realized what she was doing, I confronted her. We had a fight. A bad one. I said things I regret and I left for Italy to cool off. I never meant for the security system to malfunction. I never meant to put her or our baby in danger. His voice broke perfectly, like he'd practiced it. But when I came back and found out she'd gone to the FBI, that she'd turned everything I'd told her in confidence into ammunition against me, I realized she never loved me. She loved what I could give her. And when she couldn't control me anymore, she decided to destroy me. The story was so smooth, so plausible, so completely divorced from reality that Harper almost admired the audacity of it. Is that all? The judge asked. No, Your Honor, I have one more thing. Dante reached into his pocket, slowly, with the marshals watching his every move, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Richard, who brought it to the judge. The judge unfolded it and read, her expression unchanging. What is this? She asked. A letter, Dante said. Written by Harper 3 months ago. I found it in her nightstand drawer when I was packing to leave for Italy. Harper's heart stopped. She knew exactly what letter he was talking about. Would you like to read it, Your Honor? Richard asked. I think I should. The judge cleared her throat and began, Dear Diary. It's not a diary entry, Harper interrupted. It's a letter I never sent. To whom? The judge asked. Harper's throat closed. She looked at Patricia, who gave the smallest nod of encouragement. To my mother, Harper whispered. She died 3 years ago. I sometimes write letters to her when I'm struggling with something. I never send them, obviously. The judge's expression softened slightly, but she continued reading. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Living with Dante is like living with a stranger who sometimes pretends to be my husband. I feel invisible most days, like I'm just a piece of furniture he walks past on his way to something more important. The baby is the only thing that makes me feel real anymore. Sometimes I wish I could just disappear, take the baby and start over somewhere he'd never find us. Would that make me a terrible person? Would you understand if I did? The silence in the courtroom was crushing. Your Honor, Richard said smoothly, this letter clearly shows that Mrs. Moretti was planning to kidnap the child and disappear long before any security malfunction or federal investigation. She's been strategizing how to take my client's son away from him since before the baby was even born. Harper felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. Every private thought, every desperate moment, every cry for help she'd written to a dead woman, twisted into evidence of premeditation and malice. That letter was private, Harper said, her voice shaking. It was me processing my feelings, trying to cope with an abusive marriage. I never actually planned to... Abusive marriage? Dante's voice cut across hers. I gave you everything, Harper. A home worth millions, more money than you could spend, security, status. You gave me $50 a week and a locked door. Harper was on her feet now, months of rage finally breaking through. You controlled every aspect of my life. You monitored my movements. You cut me off from friends and family. And when I was at my most vulnerable, you left me to die. That letter you're so proud of finding? I wrote it 2 weeks before you locked me in our apartment while I was in labor. I wrote it because I was drowning and had no one to talk to because you'd systematically isolated me from every person who might have helped. Mrs. Moretti, the judge said gently, please sit down. Harper sat, shaking, Caleb stirring against her chest. The judge was quiet for a long moment, studying the letter, studying Dante, studying Harper. Mr. Moretti, she said finally, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen every kind of custody dispute, every manipulation, every tactic people use to hurt each other through their children, and I've learned to recognize certain patterns. Dante's confidence flickered. A woman who's planning to kidnap her child doesn't write letters to her dead mother wishing she could disappear. She makes plans. She gathers resources. She creates escape routes. The judge set down the letter. What I see here is a woman in crisis, reaching out to the only safe person she could think of, even though that person was gone. That's not evidence of malicious intent. That's evidence of desperation. Your Honor, Richard began. I'm not finished. The judge's voice was steel. I've also reviewed the evidence from the federal case, the recordings, the photographs, the testimony from Ms. Vale about the security system being deliberately disabled. Mr. Moretti, you tried to frame this as your wife's betrayal. But what I see is a man who attempted to control his wife through isolation and abuse, and when that failed, attempted to kill her by proxy. That's not, you had her phone disconnected. You disabled the locks and windows. You left the country for a month knowing she was 9 months pregnant and could go into labor at any time. Whether you intended for her to die or simply didn't care if she did, the result is the same. You endangered her life and the life of your unborn child. The judge picked up her gavel. Your emergency motion is denied. Your parental rights remain suspended. You will have no contact with the minor child until and unless you are acquitted of all federal charges, which frankly seems unlikely. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through Harper's entire body. Dante lunged towards her, the marshals barely catching him in time. This isn't over, he shouted as they wrestled him back. You hear me, Harper? This isn't over. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started. The marshals dragged him from the courtroom, his threats echoing down the hallway until a door slammed and cut them off. Harper sat frozen in her seat, trembling so hard she thought she might shatter. Patricia put a hand on her shoulder. Breathe. It's over. He's gone. But Harper knew it wasn't really over. Not yet. The trial took 8 months to prepare and 3 weeks to execute. Harper testified for 2 full days, walking the jury through every document, every transaction, every piece of evidence she'd collected. Selena testified for 3 days, laying out the entire financial structure of Dante's operation with the clinical precision of someone who'd built it herself. The defense tried to paint Harper as a scorned wife seeking revenge, tried to discredit Selena as a jilted lover with an axe to grind, tried to argue that the evidence was tainted by illegal searches and coerced testimony. None of it worked. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and came back with guilty verdicts on all counts: racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy, fraud, witness tampering. When the judge sentenced Dante to 43 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole, Harper felt nothing but a hollow relief. He was gone. Finally, permanently gone. But she still had to rebuild a life from the ruins he'd left behind. The civil case took another year to resolve. Patricia fought Dante's estate tooth and nail for Harper's fair share of the marital assets. The penthouse and the Malibu house were seized by the federal government to satisfy restitution claims, but Patricia managed to secure Harper a settlement of $200,000, money from legitimate investments that predated Dante's criminal enterprise. It wasn't the millions Dante had accumulated, but it was enough. Enough for a small apartment in a safe neighborhood. Enough for childcare so Harper could go back to work. Enough for a fresh start. Harper used part of the settlement to open a small consulting practice, helping women in situations like hers understand their financial options, recognize patterns of economic abuse, and document evidence if they decided to leave. She partnered with domestic violence organizations and legal aid clinics, offering her services on a sliding scale that meant sometimes she worked for free and sometimes she worked for very little. But it was hers, her work, her choice, her purpose. Caleb turned 2 in a sunny apartment with windows that opened and doors that unlocked from the inside. Harper threw him a birthday party attended by 3 toddlers from his daycare and a handful of adults who'd become her new family. Patricia, who'd become a friend beyond her role as an attorney, Miranda, who checked in regularly even though the case was long closed, and Jonah. Jonah had been there through all of it, the trial, the settlement negotiations, the slow, painful process of Harper learning to trust again. He never pushed, never demanded more than Harper was ready to give, but he was always there when she needed him. "He's getting so big," Jonah said, watching Caleb demolish a cupcake with methodical toddler precision. "I know, sometimes I can't believe it's only been 2 years." Harper looked around the apartment, modest but comfortable, filled with secondhand furniture and dollar store decorations and none of the expensive emptiness of the penthouse. "It feels like a different lifetime." "It was a different lifetime. You're not the same person who was counting $50 bills on a silk duvet." "No, I'm not." Harper smiled. That person was scared and small and convinced she deserved whatever she got. This person knows better. Jonah reached over and took her hand. The gesture was simple, familiar. They'd been dating for 6 months now, taking it slow, building something real on a foundation that had nothing to do with money or control or power. "I'm proud of you," Jonah said quietly. "Every day, I'm proud of you." Harper squeezed his hand and watched her son laugh with chocolate frosting smeared across his face, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt genuinely happy. 3 years after Dante's conviction, Harper was sitting in her small office reviewing financial documents for a new client when her phone rang. The number was blocked, which usually meant spam, but something made her answer. "Hello? Mrs. Moretti?" The voice was female, young, terrified. "This is Harper Lane." She dropped the Moretti name the day the divorce was finalized. "Who's calling?" "My name is Jessica Chen. I think you helped my sister 2 years ago. She said if I ever needed help, I should call you." Harper sat up straighter, already pulling out a legal pad. "What kind of help do you need?" "My husband controls all our money. I have 2 kids and no access to bank accounts. He travels for work, and I think he's doing something illegal because there's always cash around the house, but never any explanation of where it comes from." The woman's voice cracked. "I'm pregnant with our 3rd, and I'm scared. I need to know if I'm crazy or if I should." "You're not crazy," Harper said firmly, "and you're doing exactly the right thing by calling. Can you tell me what state you're in?" As Jessica started talking, Harper took notes with practiced efficiency, already seeing the pattern, already knowing how this would play out if Jessica didn't act soon. She'd done this consultation 100 times now, walked women through the same steps she'd taken, document everything, secure evidence, find allies, build a case. Some of them left their abusers. Some of them didn't. Harper couldn't save everyone, couldn't force people to make choices they weren't ready for. But she could offer them the same thing Jonah had offered her that night he'd broken down the penthouse door: a witness. Someone who saw what was happening and refused to look away. That evening, Harper came home to find Jonah making dinner while Caleb built elaborate block towers on the living room floor. It was such a normal scene, so beautifully ordinary, that Harper had to stop in the doorway and just breathe it in. "Good day?" Jonah asked, looking up from the pasta he was stirring. "Sad day, but necessary day." Harper dropped her bag and went to him, sliding her arms around his waist and resting her head against his back. "A woman called, pregnant, trapped, scared. Reminded me of me. Did you help her? I gave her information, resources, options. Whether she uses them is up to her." Harper pulled back and looked at Jonah. "Do you ever wonder if we're making a difference? If any of this actually matters?" "Every day." Jonah turned to face her fully. "But then I think about you, about how you went from having $50 and no way out to running a practice that's helped dozens of women escape situations just like yours. And I think, yeah, it matters. Maybe we can't save everyone, but we can make sure the people who are ready to save themselves have the tools to do it." Harper kissed him then, soft and grateful, a kiss that tasted like home and safety and all the things she'd thought she'd lost forever when she'd married Dante Moretti. Caleb chose that moment to crash his block tower with an enthusiastic boom and demand attention. Harper scooped him up, making him giggle, and carried him to the kitchen where Jonah was plating pasta with the kind of domestic competence that still sometimes surprised her. They ate dinner together at a table that was too small for 3 people, but somehow felt exactly right. They gave Caleb a bath and read him stories, and tucked him into his bed in a room that was cramped but cheerful, decorated with drawings he'd made at daycare and photos Harper had taken at the park. When he was finally asleep, Harper and Jonah sat on the tiny balcony that overlooked a parking lot and the city beyond, drinking cheap wine and talking about everything and nothing. "I got a letter from Dante today," Harper said eventually. Jonah went very still. "What did it say?" "I don't know. I didn't open it." Harper pulled the envelope from her pocket and turned it over in her hands. 43 years is a long time. Eventually he'll get out, and when he does, if he comes after you, we'll handle it, Jonah said firmly. "You, me, Patricia, Miranda, we're all still here. He's not the man he used to be, Harper. Prison changes people, and even if it doesn't, you're not the woman you used to be either." Harper looked at the envelope, her name written in Dante's precise handwriting, no return address, just the prison stamp that confirmed where it came from. Instead, she ripped the envelope in half. Then in quarters, then into pieces too small to read. "I don't need to know what he has to say," Harper said, watching the pieces flutter down into the parking lot below. "He doesn't get any more of my time, my energy, or my peace. He's done." Jonah pulled her close, and they sat like that until the city lights started to blur, and Harper realized she was crying, not from sadness or fear, but from the sheer overwhelming relief of being truly, finally, free. 5 years after the night she'd counted $50 on a silk duvet, Harper Lane stood in a small community center and addressed a room full of women who'd come to hear her speak. "Financial abuse is invisible," she told them. "It doesn't leave bruises you can photograph or injuries you can document in an ER. It leaves you broke and dependent and convinced you deserve it because you're not smart enough, not capable enough, not worth more than whatever scraps your abuser decides to give you." She paused, looking at the faces staring back at her, some scared, some angry, some desperately hopeful. "I'm here to tell you that's a lie. You're worth more. And if you're ready to take your life back, I can show you how to follow the money, build evidence, and rewrite your story on your own terms." After the presentation, a woman approached her, mid-30s, well-dressed, with the careful makeup that Harper recognized as an attempt to hide too thin features and exhausted eyes. "Can I talk to you?" the woman asked quietly. "In private?" They found an empty office, and the woman pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "My husband gives me a household allowance, $200 a week. He says it's generous, that most wives don't get that much control." She showed Harper her banking app, an account in her name with exactly $200 in it, refreshed every Monday like clockwork. "Meanwhile," the woman continued, "he just bought a yacht. I saw the paperwork in his office. $3 million. And I'm rationing groceries to make $200 last." Harper took out her notepad, her heart aching with familiar recognition. "Tell me everything." The conversation lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, Harper had enough information to start building a case. She gave the woman her card, a safety plan, and most importantly, the knowledge that she wasn't crazy, wasn't ungrateful, wasn't asking for too much. She was just asking to be treated like a human being instead of a possession. Walking home that night, Harper thought about the woman in the penthouse counting $50 and wondering if she deserved more. She thought about all the women who were still in those cages, still counting inadequate money, still convincing themselves it was somehow their fault. She couldn't save them all, but she could make sure they knew they deserved to be saved. When Harper got home, Caleb was already in bed, and Jonah was waiting up with tea and a knowing smile. "Another one?" he asked. "Another one," Harper confirmed. "Yacht-owning husband, rationed grocery money, the usual." "You're going to help her." "I'm going to try." Harper collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but satisfied. "How was your day?" "I finalized the paperwork for the foundation." Jonah handed her a folder. "The Sarah Pierce Memorial Fund for Economic Justice. It's official." Harper opened the folder and read through the documents establishing a nonprofit that would provide free financial consulting to abuse survivors, fund legal representation for custody cases, and support women rebuilding their lives after leaving controlling partners. It was everything they'd been working toward for the past year. "We did it," Harper whispered. "You did it," Jonah corrected. "I just helped organize the paperwork. You're the one who turned your worst experience into something that helps other people." Harper thought about Dante, locked in a cell 3 states away, his empire dismantled, his power gone. She thought about all the women he'd never hurt, because Harper had found the courage to document his crimes and hand them to federal investigators. And she thought about the $50 he'd left her, the ultimate symbol of his contempt, his certainty that she was too weak and small to be anything but grateful for his scraps. She wished she'd kept one of those bills. She would have framed it and hung it in her office with a plaque that read, "The cost of underestimating a desperate woman." Instead, she had something better, a life she'd built from nothing, a son who would grow up knowing his mother was strong, and a network of women who were learning to see their own worth clearly. Dante had tried to make her invisible. Instead, he'd made her unstoppable. 7 years after the conviction, Harper received a call from the federal prison system. Dante had been moved to a maximum security facility after attempting to coordinate witness intimidation from inside prison. He'd tried to send threats to Selena, to Harper, to the judge who'd sentenced him. It hadn't worked. All he'd done was add another 10 years to his sentence. Harper thanked the caller for the notification and hung up without any of the fear she might have felt years ago. Dante was no longer the villain in her story. He was just a cautionary tale she told to clients about what happened to men who thought control was the same as power. That night, she and Jonah and Caleb, now 7 years old and full of questions about everything, sat down to dinner in their home. Not the tiny apartment, but a real house they'd bought together with Harper's consulting income and Jonah's return to forensic accounting as an independent consultant. "Mom?" Caleb asked through a mouthful of chicken. "Why don't I have a dad like the other kids?" Harper and Jonah exchanged glances. They'd known this question was coming, had prepared for it, but it still made Harper's chest tight. "You do have a dad," Harper said carefully. "His name was Dante, and he made some very bad choices that meant he couldn't be part of our family. But that doesn't mean you're missing anything, because you have people who love you and take care of you and will always be here for you." Caleb thought about this, then looked at Jonah. "Are you going to marry my mom?" Jonah nearly choked on his water. "What?" "My friend Sarah says when grown-ups live together and love each other, they get married. So are you?" Harper felt her face flame, but Jonah just smiled. That soft, genuine smile she'd fallen in love with somewhere between the FBI safe house and the custody trial. "Would you be okay with that?" Jonah asked Caleb seriously. "If I married your mom?" Caleb shrugged with the casual indifference of a 7-year-old. "I guess. Can I have dessert now?" After Caleb went to bed, Harper and Jonah sat on the porch of their small house and watched the stars come out over the city. "He's right, you know," Jonah said quietly, "about the marriage thing." Harper's heart stuttered. "Jonah, I'm not proposing. Not right now, not like this." He took her hand. "But I want you to know that I'm in this for the long haul. You and Caleb, this life we've built together, it's everything I thought I'd lost when Sarah died. You gave me a second chance at building a family, and I don't take that lightly." "I never thought I'd want to get married again," Harper admitted. "After Dante, the whole institution felt like a trap." "It was a trap with him, but it doesn't have to be." Jonah squeezed her hand. "Marriage should be about partnership, not ownership. About choosing each other every day, not controlling each other." Harper leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the night air and the safety of being with someone who saw her as an equal instead of a possession. "Ask me again in a year," she said quietly, "when I've had time to really believe that kind of marriage is possible." "Deal." They sat in comfortable silence, and Harper thought about the girl who'd worked in an art gallery and dreamed of a fairy tale romance. That girl had gotten her fairy tale, just not the one she'd expected. No prince, no castle, no happily ever after that looked like a movie. Instead, she'd gotten something better. A hard-won freedom, a purpose born from pain, and a love built on respect rather than illusion. 10 years after counting $50 on a silk duvet, Harper Lane stood in a federal courthouse lobby and watched Selena Vale walk past on her way to a civil trial. They hadn't spoken since Selena's testimony had helped convict Dante, but their eyes met across the marble floor. Selena looked different, older, harder, her expensive clothes and perfect hair unable to hide the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. Harper waited to feel anger or satisfaction or vindication. Instead, she felt nothing but a distant pity for a woman who'd chosen ambition over ethics and would spend the rest of her life living with that choice. Selena broke eye contact first and hurried away, and Harper turned back to her own life, the one she'd built piece by painful piece from the ruins Dante had left behind. She had a client meeting in 20 minutes, a woman whose husband controlled every dollar and told her she was too stupid to manage money. Harper had her notes ready, her questions prepared, and a plan to show this woman exactly what her husband was hiding and how to document it legally. It was what she did now. Day after day, case after case, woman after woman. Some of them left their abusers, some of them went back. Harper couldn't control that, but she could make sure that when they were ready to save themselves, they knew how to follow the money. Because in the end, that's what it always came down to. Not love or family or partnership, but power and control and the question of who got to decide how the money was spent. Dante had thought he could keep her small by keeping her broke. He'd thought $50 and a grocery list would be enough to contain her. He'd been catastrophically wrong. Harper smiled as she walked into her meeting, thinking about Dante in his cell, stripped of everything that had once made him feel powerful. And she thought about herself, running a thriving practice, raising a son who knew his mother was strong, planning a future with a man who saw her as an equal. She'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and turned it into the foundation for helping other women escape the same trap. That felt like justice. Real, hard-won, messy justice that didn't come from a courtroom or a jury verdict, but from the simple act of refusing to stay broken. Dante had tried to destroy her. Instead, he'd forged her into something he could never break again. And if that wasn't the perfect revenge, Harper didn't know what was.